Story 1.
I discovered my wife cheating with her boss during a business trip and chose divorce over deception. Every bit of this was entirely beyond my comprehension from the very start. 11 years ago, I completed my college education and returned to my hometown after self-financing my studies. Due to self-funding, I didn't receive any financial support. Nevertheless, I obtained the right to free employment and landed a respectable, well-paying job. As I built a successful career, I often had to travel to the regional center, where I once ran into my fellow student Earl. We weren't close pals, but we consistently had enjoyable conversations. Earl eventually assisted me, and the approvals, which took weeks, were secured. One day, Earl suddenly became the CEO of the company founded by his wife Zara's parents. It was at a friendly gathering at Earl's place that I met my future wife Lila. Lila was wrapping up her university studies and residing with her retired parents in the city center. Somehow, we started dating. Our relationship heated up, and after 6 months, realizing Lila was pregnant, I proposed to her. She accepted on the condition that I moved to the regional center. I agreed, and we had a wedding attended by Earl and his wife Zara. Lila's parents generously gifted us a 3-bedroom apartment inherited from her mother-in-law's sister, which was registered under Lila's name. We had a son, and soon after, Lila became pregnant again and gave birth to a daughter. Based on Earl's recommendation, I secured a job with a highly reputable organization. There, I quickly established myself as a knowledgeable specialist. Unsurprisingly, the company led by Earl was given priority in selecting contractors for construction projects, especially when I represented the client. Work was thriving, and earnings were outstanding. 10 years passed, and our son was about to start 4th grade, while our daughter was entering the 2nd grade. 2 weeks ago, I sat in a hotel's conference room. The negotiations were intense and dragging on, so they called for a break. I went out with one of the representatives from the Capitol to the conference room's balcony and took a seat at a table. The representative, observing the hotel visitors in the lobby, remarked about how many years had passed and how Earl was still in love with his wife and happily married, even though old habits die hard. Earl, who was over at the reception desk checking out, was with his girlfriend by the kiosk. I noticed Earl at the front desk with his wife Lila at the kiosk. Earl finished checking out, and they both walked to the elevator. At first, my immediate impulse was to locate them and confront Earl physically. However, I realized that such an action would lead to failed negotiations, a public brawl, and a possible divorce. I pondered the sound I heard in my ears. It had been years. I turned to the person I was conversing with. I inquired about how long the person had known him, and they responded that they had known him for a long time. They mentioned being a local resident and living in the area for years. Earl had met his current wife, Zara, after college. According to the person, Zara came from a well-off family, with her father being an entrepreneur who had founded several businesses with his wife. Earl had married Zara and had quickly assumed the role of CEO in one of the companies. However, the person mentioned avoiding any business dealings with Earl due to his unreliability and lack of trustworthiness. Once the negotiations were concluded and the contract was signed, I returned to my office. I sat at my desk and began contemplating my next steps. It was evident that I needed to part ways with my wife. However, I also needed to ensure my role as a father to our children. I had to secure a place to live after our divorce. The apartment we resided in was gifted to us by Lila's parents, with the property deed in her name. So the best course of action was to return to my parents' house, which, God willing, had 2 floors, with the 2nd floor unused. Lila had never visited my hometown, expressing reservations about what she would do there. The departure was a decision I had to arrange, ensuring I didn't break my promise to take the children to the seaside this year and avoiding deceiving them. With a plan in mind, I began to put it into action. I was well aware of Earl and his wife's routines. I knew that Zara typically went to a cafe located away from their workplaces for lunch, believing that the food there was superior. She had invited me and Lila to dine there multiple times. Now I understood why Lila never visited that cafe and why Earl never frequented it either. The following day, I entered the cafe and spotted Zara. I sat down at her table. She greeted me, and I inquired if she was trying out the local cuisine. She replied that she didn't just decide to try the local food, and I asked about Earl. She confirmed that it was indeed about Earl and Lila. I shared that I had suspected him for a long time, but I couldn't prove it as he was always home on time. Zara inquired about where I had caught them, and I explained that it was at a hotel downtown where he had a friend working as a director. Zara asked how long they had been dating, and I informed her that they started dating before I met Lila. She expressed her dismay, mentioning how Earl had introduced Lila to her as a friend of mine. I mentioned that I took a DNA test to be sure about the kids, and Zara shared that Earl was unable to have children due to treatment that had not produced any results. She expressed her desire to have kids. We discussed our plans, and I mentioned that I intended to divorce Lila and change my last name. Zara planned to divorce Earl but wanted concrete evidence. We discussed the idea of setting up webcams to catch them in the act, and I agreed to keep in touch about the plan. I explained that I needed to return home since Lila owned the apartment, and Zara offered to talk to her father about helping me find a place to live. We agreed to set a date for further discussion. In the following days, I prepared for my upcoming separation from my wife. I informed the school about our plans to move and transfer the kids to a new school in a different city. I had to obtain confirmation of the kids' enrollment in the new school during working hours, and the necessary documents were provided. Zara called and asked for passports to obtain visas for a trip to Italy, the city of Pesaro. The visas were quickly obtained. Soon she told me that she had spoken to her father about Jason and his job at the new branch. Her father conducted a background check and approved it, asking her to come in for an interview. After the conversation with Zara's father, where they arranged his position and salary, I spoke to my boss about the situation. My boss, who had been divorced twice before, asked how he could help. I explained that I needed a quiet vacation and to be let go from my job. I inquired if there was a way to work it out. My boss considered it and eventually agreed. The preparations for the separation were finalized. I told Lila about my upcoming business trip, which would only last 3 or 4 days. On the same day, Lila informed her husband Earl about my departure, and he was happy about it. He mentioned that his wife was spending 2 weeks at a sanatorium. She asked about my plans for the kids, and I explained that I would take them to my parents' place since it was vacation time and they couldn't stay at home. Lila expressed her frustration about having a baby, mentioning that she couldn't have children, and suggesting I hire a nanny or rely on my husband. We discussed our plan for the next day, with Lila mentioning that she would be leaving in the morning. I packed my travel bag, said goodbye to Lila, and headed to the train station, though I actually just took a shuttle bus 1 stop away. My hired car for long-distance moving was waiting there, and we drove to my house, where I saw Lila taking the children and getting into a cab with them, heading to her parents' house. Half an hour later, Lila arrived at her mother's house, telling her she had brought the grandchildren and asked when they could go to the sea. She promised to call every night and then got into a waiting cab to go to work. Meanwhile, I packed up the house, putting everything in the cardboard boxes. The boxes were immediately loaded into the car, and within an hour and a half, everything was packed and ready. Only a large suitcase and 2 bags were packed separately. After packing the car, I called my father and told him that the movers were on their way to his place, and I would join them in a month. Lila, on the other hand, informed the CEO that I had left and the kids were with her grandparents, so she was free until Monday. The CEO agreed to let her leave an hour early. After working most of the day, Lila signed out early, claiming to attend a meeting with a customer. She left the office, and shortly after, Earl left as well, driving away. Zara, who had placed a tracker and microphone in the car, noticed that it had started moving around the city and saw the car turn into an alley and stop. The door closed and there was an immediate sound. Lila mentioned that they needed to go to the store, and Earl replied that they had everything at home. Around the same time, I stopped by my in-laws' house and informed them that I was picking up the kids, as Lila had told them the kids would stay with them for 3 or 4 days. They decided to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary and had a surprise planned for Lila. 10 minutes later, the kids and I headed to the airport, with our flight scheduled for 2 hours later. Lila entered Earl's kitchen, checked the refrigerator, and set a complete table. She asked Earl to open a bottle of champagne and suggested having some cake later. Earl questioned what they were toasting to, and Lila mentioned that it was their 10th anniversary. Even though I had pointed out that it was partly due to her affair with a client's lawyer, they sat down for dinner. Afterward, they went upstairs to the bedroom. Lila cleared the dishes and put them in the sink, and then they enjoyed some fruit and cognac on the coffee table before heading into the shower. After they came out, Lila suggested she would call her parents and be all his in the meantime. Earl agreed, and she made the call. Lila, in the meantime, quickly stood up, dialed my number, and told me she wanted to congratulate me on our 10th wedding anniversary. I was puzzled and questioned why she was saying that. Lila then mentioned that she was in Earl's bedroom, not fully dressed, and he was looking at her while she spoke to me. Hurt by her words, I offered to come over and talk, believing she would understand, and I asked her not to go away. Lila burst into tears, and Earl looked confused. The bedroom door suddenly opened, and Zara's parents entered, with Zara following behind them. Lila quickly started dressing. Zara's father asked Earl what was happening. Earl replied that they were just having a good time. Zara's mother commented on Earl being undressed, and Zara firmly decided to cut him out of her life. Zara's father advised Earl to write a resignation letter and warned him that if he messed up again, he would be fired. Lila thanked them and left. Back at her apartment, Lila realized no one was home and tried calling me, but there was no signal. I had nearly finished observing what was happening in the bedroom, turned off my tablet, and called Zara. She informed me that they were on their way to the landing with the kids and hoped to hear from me when they returned. We soon boarded the plane and headed to a different city. Our flights were well coordinated, and we eventually landed in Italy. A company representative helped us get to the hotel on the coastline. After checking in, the kids were eager to go to the sea visible from their window. They encountered a woman and her 7-year-old daughter, who had been on the same flight. The woman had experienced motion sickness, but her daughter was eager to get to the sea. I suggested looking after her daughter so the woman could rest. Regina, the woman, introduced herself, and we made our way to the sea. Following wooden ladders almost to the water's edge, small fish swam in the shallow water, and I even managed to catch a small crab. Afterward, we went swimming, and Regina decided to join. Meanwhile, Earl was dealing with the issue of finding a place to live. With help from his parents, he managed to secure a one-room apartment but struggled to find employment. He had some savings to get by but needed to think about his future. Earl began searching for jobs in various offices but faced challenges, as most executive positions were already filled, and he didn't want a lower-level job. Eventually, he couldn't even secure a position as an ordinary engineer. Lila spent 2 days searching for me and the children around the city but couldn't locate us. Contrary to what my father believed, she did try calling us. My parents explained that I had moved my belongings to their place and gone somewhere else with the kids. Lila assumed I had gone on vacation and decided to visit my office to find out more. There, she learned that I had resigned. In the evening, Lila called Earl and asked about his situation. Earl explained the meager conditions of his one-bedroom apartment and the job struggles he was facing. Lila discussed her own work situation and the establishment of a branch office, but Earl had no information about my plans. She mentioned her intention to try and reunite with her husband and kids, as well as her regrets about her past relationship with Earl. Earl inquired about my current situation, and Lila informed him that she was unsure of my whereabouts or my decision to leave with the kids. On that day, Lila gathered her courage and visited the cottage where Zara lived. Zara silently invited her inside, and they had a conversation in the large hall on the first floor. Lila began with an apology and asked Zara to understand her actions. She questioned why Zara continued working for their company, expressing her ignorance of Zara's history with Earl and their relationship. Zara explained that she had not known about Lila's relationship with Earl, and they discussed their shared experiences of being deceived by him. I came to the realization that Earl wouldn't accept my kids, and I didn't even know where they were at the moment. Zara tried to reassure me, saying that I shouldn't worry, as my children were mine and Earl couldn't have kids. Since Earl was single now, she suggested that there was no obstacle preventing us from reconciling. I responded by explaining that I had realized I didn't need him as a partner. Earl had contacted me upon learning that I was alone and asked to stay with me, but I had refused. I also shared my concern about not being able to find Jason and the kids. I mentioned that he wasn't at his parents' house, even though he had moved his things there. I knew he had gone on vacation with the kids to the sea, but I had no idea when he would return. It was almost September 1st, and the kids had school. I expressed my confusion about what to do and how to bring Jason back. Zara advised me that she couldn't assist with that and indicated that it was unlikely that Jason would forgive me and take me back. Today, Regina and her daughter Rose left the hotel and headed toward the center of Pesaro. After I provided a brief explanation to the children about the direction they should take, they walked ahead. Regina asked if we really needed such a detailed explanation. I responded that we did because in the city where we came from, they talked about bike lanes, but they were rarely seen. We weren't accustomed to the concept of separating pedestrian zones from cycling lanes and the areas for vehicular traffic. Here, cyclists didn't ride in pedestrian zones, even if they were empty, as the locals adhered strictly to the designated lanes. We strolled leisurely through the city in the evening and eventually reached the Sphere Monument. Regina asked about the significance of the monument. I explained that it was the Sphere Grande de Pomodoro, with Arnaldo Pomodoro being the sculptor behind the monument, who happened to be a native of Pesaro. I also shared some of the city's attractions, such as its beautiful sandy beaches, pristine sea, and a running promenade with a long pier extending into the sea, perfect for a relaxing stroll and enjoying the waters. Regina expressed her surprise at the city's fame and Italy's rich history. Regina then asked how I knew so much, wondering if I were a history teacher. I clarified that I wasn't, but I had done some research about the places we might visit on the internet when I found out where we were going. I didn't want to be completely clueless, as it could save us from misunderstandings. Regina suggested visiting the Lanati Aquarium and inquired if it was nearby. I explained that it wasn't exactly nearby, as it was in Cattolica, about 22 kilometers away, which we could reach in about half an hour. Regina agreed to the plan. I asked Regina about our plans for the next day. She mentioned that we could sleep in, since we planned to visit the Rossini Theater and explore the old town. However, the day after, we would wake up early at 7, as we hadn't come there to sleep. I proposed grabbing breakfast on the go and assured Regina that I had the theater and Old Town route covered. Regina then asked where we should go next, and I suggested heading to a nearby restaurant. Regina hesitated slightly, noting that we had just had dinner. I reassured her that we would only have a little something to eat, and we headed to an open-air restaurant where the waiter handed us menus. We quickly placed our orders, with me being mindful of the children. As we enjoyed our meal, I asked Regina about her ability to travel with her young daughter despite her husband. Regina explained that she was not married and described her past relationship. She mentioned how they had never officially registered their relationship, and after their daughter Rose was born, he began distancing himself and even brought another woman home. Regina had decided to move out with her daughter and was considering returning to her mom's neighborhood. She also mentioned that her husband showed no interest in helping with their daughter, and Rose's birth certificate had a dash under father, which meant she could sue him for child support. However, Regina didn't want to do that and was determined to raise her daughter on her own. I inquired about her field of expertise, and Regina explained that she was a civil engineer. She had managed to save money for the trip by doing various jobs, including providing cost estimates for clients who needed help with their building projects. Unfortunately, the company she worked for had gone bankrupt, and she was currently technically unemployed but remained optimistic about the future. We continued our conversation while sipping on dry Italian wine, and the children had a taste of the seafood salad. Regina mentioned that her mother lived in a nearby village just 5 kilometers away from the city center. I shared with Regina that I had been appointed as the branch director in the city. She found it coincidental that we were both from the same hometown. After finishing our meal, we returned to our hotel late in the evening. I reminded Regina about our early start the next day to visit the aquarium. The kids asked about our plans, and I explained that we would be seeing sharks. The following day, we arrived at the Acquario di Cattolica, a popular oceanarium in Cattolica. We spent a significant amount of time observing the marine life in various pools and aquariums. Our visit even included an aquarium where visitors could touch the creatures, which brought joy to the children. After our visit, we decided to look for a place to eat outside the aquarium to avoid the higher prices. While searching for a restaurant, we spotted a bus heading back to Pesaro, so we decided to return for lunch. In around 40 minutes, we found ourselves at a familiar seaside cafe, enjoying classic Italian dishes like pasta with chicken parmesan. After our meal, we decided to hit the beach despite the scorching sun and the city's siesta time, which made things a bit inconvenient for tourists. We returned to the hotel, grabbed our towels, and met at the reception before making our way to the beach. The children eagerly stripped down and splashed into the water, with Regina and me following suit. After gathering our belongings, we spent some time in the water, watching the children excitedly chase small crabs in the shallow waves. Regina took the opportunity to ask me if that was why I was on vacation without my wife. I confided in her, explaining that I had discovered my wife was having an affair with her ex-boyfriend, who had married her for her position and money, even putting her to work with him. Regina inquired about my plans, and I revealed that I had taken what I could and moved back to my parents' house. I had decided to go on vacation with the kids, and reconciliation was not in the cards. She asked about the kids, and I explained that they would stay with me. I mentioned that, in a divorce, the court typically favored the mother, so I had considered waiting until the children were 14, at which point they could decide which parent to live with. Divorce wasn't in the immediate plan, but I wouldn't be living with my wife. Regina inquired if I could handle 2 kids on my own, and I replied that I was managing. I shared a story about a guy I knew whose wife had left him with 2 girls, and when she returned 8 years later, the girls refused to let her in. They had already divorced by then. Regina asked, "What if your wife initiated the divorce?" I mentioned that my son Martin's opinion could be considered in court, but it wasn't the sole determining factor. She asked about my plan, and I explained that I would keep the kids hidden if needed, despite potential legal consequences. Regina questioned if the kids wanted to spend time with their mother, and I replied that it wasn't likely in the near future. Regina then asked if I would accept her offer to work at her branch, and I agreed, saying I'd like to but needed to find a place to live, as it was challenging to find a job in my neighborhood, and I didn't want to lose my professional qualifications. Regina assured me that she would assist in finding accommodation and enrolling Rose in school. Their vacation eventually ended, and they returned home. Upon our return, I took the kids shopping for school supplies. In the afternoon, I called Samuel to discuss the branch's need for engineering and technical workers and mentioned Lila's new position. As for Earl, he had disappeared without a trace, and no one knew his whereabouts. On Sunday, I went to pick up Regina and Mary, arranging for them to stay on the 2nd floor of my parents' house. The kids were excited to have Mary living with them, and they would all be attending school together. Regina prepared for her first day of work on Monday, while I had my responsibilities to attend to. The children still had 3 more days of vacation and stayed with my parents. Meanwhile, Lila remained completely unaware of my and the children's whereabouts. She went to work and made efforts to locate me, as she believed it was close to September 1st. She decided to visit the school, only to find out that I had transferred the children to a school in the neighborhood near my parents' home. She planned to visit them on the first Friday of September. Back at the office, there was much speculation about Earl's sudden departure and Lila's relocation. Many employees were curious about the reasons behind the leadership changes. Eventually, news of the branch's opening reached the office, and Lila also received this information. On the first Friday of September, Lila took a day off at her own expense and headed to the district center. She arrived early in the morning, armed with my parents' address, and located their house on the street. Approaching the gate, Lila observed me, along with Martin and Mary, leaving the house. They were accompanied by an unfamiliar woman and a girl about Mary's age. Unnoticed, Lila followed them and soon realized that the woman and I were taking the children to school before heading to work. Observing this, Lila decided to wait for the workday to begin. Once it did, she approached the reception area, where a young secretary was sorting through papers. The secretary called me and asked if I would accept a visitor, to which I agreed. Lila was then permitted to enter the office. Inside, she found me sitting at a desk covered with papers. I greeted her, and she returned the greeting. I gestured for her to sit and commented on her nice office. She thanked me and mentioned that her assistant had handled all the arrangements. Getting to the point, Lila said she was there to discuss our next steps, understanding that keeping our family together was unlikely but emphasizing the need to work things out for the sake of our children. I agreed, expressing my desire to maintain custody of the kids while also wanting to be involved in their lives and see them. Lila conveyed her concern about not losing touch with the children, seeking assurance from me. I assured her that the kids were at school and that I had plans to spend time with them, including going mushroom hunting in the woods the next day. Lila commented on Regina being my new partner, which I confirmed. She inquired if she could meet the kids, and I agreed, explaining that the children and I had planned various activities in the coming months. I requested that she give me advance notice, as our schedules were already filled. Lila mentioned that I had always enjoyed surprising people, prompting me to share that we had vacationed on the Adriatic Sea in Italy. She asked about Earl and my new phone number, to which I revealed that I hadn't changed my number. I had just turned it back on. After our conversation, Lila left the office as per my suggestion and went to a cafe. I then called Regina to inform her about my meeting with Lila and her requests to see the children. Regina expressed her opinion that preventing a mother from seeing her children might not be wise. Regina and I discussed the situation. I explained that I didn't expect Lila to show up and was uncertain about making a decision on my own. Regina firmly expressed her decision not to interfere, emphasizing that it was a choice I had to make independently. I mentioned that I had already made up my mind a long time ago when I discovered Lila's infidelity. I stated that nothing would change that decision, as the deception had persisted for too long. Regina inquired about the time it would take to heal, and I shared that it varied from person to person, typically 3 months to a year for men, and a month or 2 for women. During this period, some might want to return to a relationship driven by a yearning for lost love, while others would seek a fresh start if there was no love left. Later, I decided to meet Lila at a cafe as planned. I arrived early and found Lila in a conversation with Regina, who appeared tearful. Lila assured me that I wasn't interrupting and said they had discussed arrangements for picking up the kids from school, feeding them, and taking them to the park. I asked what had transpired during their conversation. Lila explained that they talked about how Lila and I had met and how her daughter had liked me. Regina had described me as reliable and safe, and had convinced Lila not to confront me about the children. I asked Lila if she agreed with Regina's perspective, and she nodded in agreement, acknowledging that she had grown distant from her children over the years. She expressed her remorse and explained that she had been influenced by Earl, leaving most of the childcare responsibilities to me. Lila realized she couldn't handle the kids without my help, but she understood that I wouldn't forgive her for her deceit. She also mentioned that Regina seemed to understand her better than she understood herself, and that Mary was getting along well with Regina's daughter. I asked if they were planning to eat, and Lila informed me that they were heading to the park to wait for the kids. She assured me that the children would find them there, as they often walked to the park and fed the swans. We left the cafe and went to the park, where I directed them to a bench by the water, explaining that we often walked there and fed the swans. Lila asked if the swans had flown away yet, and I told her they hadn't, but they would soon, having sent their young ones on their way. Lila then questioned why I had married her. I honestly admitted that she was not the woman of my dreams, and explained that I had married her because Earl had insisted on it. I revealed that Earl's motivation was to use our marriage as a cover for his own marital issues with his wife, Zara. Lila inquired about how Earl had taken the situation, and I explained that he had been jealous but unable to take any action. Additionally, when I became pregnant, he believed the child was his, as Lila had been away for a while. It was only a year and a half later, during one of my business trips, that Lila became pregnant with Mary. I inquired whether he still believed the children were his. Lila shared that Zara had informed her that Earl wasn't capable of having children. She mentioned that Zara had told her the same thing when they met while she was searching for me. I questioned her about whether she believed Zara's claims. Lila responded by saying that anything was possible in life, and Zara might not be able to have her own children. She suggested I consider getting a DNA paternity test. I asked if she had taken the test herself. Lila admitted that she had, and I pressed further, asking about the results and who the father was. She confessed that she didn't know the results because she hadn't looked at them. Lila explained that she didn't care about the test results, as the children were hers, even though she had given birth to them but hadn't raised them. She had no intention of giving them up to anyone. When she asked if I was interested, I replied firmly that I was not. Eventually, Regina and I divorced Lila, and she relinquished the responsibility of raising the children to me. In court, there was no contest regarding this arrangement. 6 months later, Regina and I got married, and I adopted Rose.
Story 2.
Discovering my wife's affair led to a ruthless plan of revenge that turned our lives upside down. I hushed Michael as my home number flashed on my mobile screen. Barely dressed, flopping onto the hotel bed, Michael shot me a resentful look. "Dave, honey, I was just about to dial you," I lied. "I crawled into bed and just wanted to hear your voice before drifting off." It's surprisingly easy to pretend. My affair with my boss, Michael, had been going on for 3 months. This was only our 4th secret meeting, the first one outside a dingy motel room during a work conference in another state. We went out for a fancy dinner before heading back to our hotel. I was wearing black suspenders and stockings while he sported ridiculous ladybug print boxers. The message I sent to Dave felt empty. Heading to bed early, give the kids goodnight kisses, hoping for some peace tonight. It hurt to talk to Dave while being with Michael. Honestly, my husband deserved better. Today, I promised myself to end things, but guilt weighed on me, dampening any enjoyment. I didn't actively seek out an affair, but the intense satisfaction of that first encounter with Michael kept drawing me back. The thought of losing my marriage terrified me, yet I couldn't resist the temptation, even though I promised myself I wouldn't repeat it. And here I was, giving in once again, lost in a haze of wine, Michael's charm, and memories of Dave's love. I struggled to focus on Dave's questions. Desperate to cover up, I quickly diverted. "Dave, let's forget about the boring conference stuff. Instead, let's talk about what I have planned for you when I get back on Friday." Dave's response hit me like a ton of bricks, making me drop the phone and recoil in pain as agony shot through me. I screamed, accidentally scratching Michael's face with my suspender belt's hook. Holding my throbbing crotch, I reached for the phone, but it was too late. The call had ended. In a panic, I tried redialing but couldn't reconnect. Michael, confused, asked, "What did that jerk say?" After composing himself, he questioned, "Are you still craving him, baby? Did Michael leave you unsatisfied?" I wanted to scream. Dave knew. He knew about us. "I need to go home," I declared. Ignoring the pain, I hurriedly dressed, grabbed my suitcase, and headed for the door. "Cindy, do you think your husband knows who my wife is?" Michael asked eagerly, not sparing a glance for the self-centered guy. Ignoring his desperate question, I dashed to the lobby where the night porter handed me a pen. From there, I sat at Brisbane Airport from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., calling home repeatedly but only getting busy signals. Dave's cell phone was no better, straight to voicemail. Departing from Melbourne Airport at 7:30 a.m., I took a $150 taxi to our country house, anticipating it to be empty with the kids at school and Dave at work. I was met with more than emptiness when I opened the door. It looked deserted, giving off an eerie vibe, but a quick glance confirmed my fear. Much of Dave's and the girls' belongings were missing. Despair washed over me as I faced the consequences of my foolish actions. Brewing a strong coffee in an attempt to lift my spirits, I confronted the reality of my situation, exhausted from lack of sleep for over a day, the restless night before, and the burden of heavy thoughts during the flight. I felt weighed down. Where could Dave have gone? It took an hour to remember that our phones had a tracking feature to find a partner's phone, and another hour to figure out how to use it. But it revealed Dave's cell phone heading north on the Hume Highway. I should have known right away. In times of stress, Dave always sought comfort with his sister, his only living relative, who lived in Albury. Reachable via the Hume. Hurrying out of the house with only the luggage I had in Brisbane, what should have been a 4-hour drive to Albury turned into a nightmare. The monotonous roads threatened to lull me to sleep, but I knew reaching Dave as soon as possible improved our chances of saving our marriage. Why hadn't I thought about it sooner? I didn't rest, constantly calling Dave's cell phone. Thoughts of divorce swirled in my mind, knowing that the law favored women in custody battles. Dave was devoted to our kids. He wouldn't want this. But if necessary, I could use it to my advantage. Struggling to stay awake, I finally arrived at my sister-in-law's cottage. The house was silent and empty. They probably expected me to chase after them and ran off. I decided to stay in the car and wait for their return. I must have fallen asleep for a couple of hours because it was already late evening when I woke up. A brief nap didn't help at all. I cursed myself for not using the phone tracking feature again. Dave's phone was now nearing the outer suburb of Sydney. Without much hesitation, I set off in pursuit, but exhaustion nearly got the best of me, forcing me to stop at a motel in the town of Yass. Before collapsing onto the bed, I checked Dave's location. The phone was pinpointed in the Terry Hills area of Sydney. What was he doing in Terry Hills? There were no friends or family there, no one I could recall. I woke up just after 4 in the morning, thinking I might catch Dave when he was too tired to ignore my call. I immediately dialed his mobile number, but it went straight to voicemail. "Dave, what's going on?" I clenched my teeth in frustration and headed north once more. By 8, I found myself on the outskirts of Sydney and decided to be strategic. I pulled over to check my husband's location. Phew, he was still in Terry Hills. I plugged Terry Hills into my sat-nav and hit the road. Ever experienced Sydney traffic on the Thursday before a long weekend? It's a nightmare. When I finally reached Terry Hills, my car was running on fumes. Honestly, I was barely holding on myself. A quick snack at a roadside diner just wasn't enough to handle the stress. Stopping on the side of the road, I took another look at where Dave was. According to the tracker, he was 50 kilometers east of Sydney. How was that possible? There's nothing but the Tasman Sea there. On closer inspection, I noticed his altitude was 6,000 m and his speed was over 500 km/h. That jerk was on a plane. I watched as the trail veered north and vanished. Dave and my kids were on a plane going nowhere. Well, my dear husband, I made the decision to move forward, but I felt lost, unsure of what steps to take next. When I spotted the hotel signs at the airport, I slowed down. Booking a room, even just for one night, took a toll on my credit card funds. Yet, in the relative calm of my room, I scolded myself for not checking at home if the children's passports were in the safe. I stared at my phone, feeling a surge of excitement when, sometime later, the locator suddenly indicated that Dave was 10,000 m above Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. Surely Dave wouldn't take the kids to such a risky place. However, it made me wonder, how long has Dave been planning this? Does he know the divorce laws as well as I do? Could he try to run away with the kids to a place where I can't find them? Surely not. He's not that foolish. He knows I'll track him down no matter where he hides, even if it's at the ends of the earth. I must have dozed off for a while because when I woke up, I found that Dave was in Bangkok. However, I wasn't going to make the same mistake again and decided to keep an eye on him to make sure he wasn't transiting somewhere else. It was a long night, at the end of which Dave was still in Thailand. Now my problem was how to get from Sydney to Thailand when my son was lying at home in Melbourne. Trying to book a plane ticket home revealed that my credit card was exhausted. I jumped on the internet and after a few clicks, I discovered that all but $2,000 had disappeared from all accounts that I could access. It definitely seemed like my smart husband had made his move and left me without any resources to find him. But why would he want to leave me with nothing? Was it his sense of fair play? The remaining drop of love for me? I stopped kidding myself. I transferred the money to a credit card and bought the cheapest flight ticket from Sydney to Melbourne. I abandoned the car in the airport parking lot. My children were more important to me. The budget airline canceled the first 2 flights that could have taken me. Why didn't I think to take my passport with me right away? I was hoping that Dave and the girls would stay in Thailand for a fun weekend. Otherwise, I would be so damn unhappy. The money was running out catastrophically. I returned home after another exorbitantly expensive taxi ride. I made sure that Dave hadn't moved anywhere yet and called the travel agency I usually used. The next morning, I secured a last-minute spot in a freight class transporting cattle to Thailand. The agent confirmed that I didn't need a visa. A trip to the safe for a passport confirmed that my children's passports were there. I just gritted my teeth. Right, watch out, Dave, I'm coming. Since the flight was at 8 a.m. and I didn't have a car, I ordered a taxi for 4 a.m. and went to pack my things. When the sky was still pitch black, I woke up quite alarmed. Well, at least I got some sleep. Stress grew unstressed when I went to get my little travel suitcase, and the handle broke off. The taxi driver fumed while I quickly stuffed all my gear into the only other suitcase of the same size that I had. At the morning flights, It seemed as if it was for evil or popular. I barely made my way through a long queue at check-in and customs to get to the waiting room just in time. After getting into the cattle truck, I checked. Dave was still in Bangkok until the flight attendant growled at me to turn off the phone. As soon as we took off, I used the plane's internet to enable international roaming on my phone. The hours dragged on. I got off the aerobridge and walked along the row of windows outside, trying not to think about how dangerously small my funds were. But calmly, confident that I can, if not persuade, then intimidate and patiently. I turned on the phone's fine tracking function, and it immediately beeped. Dave was only 346 meters away from me, directly to the east. Running to the nearest window, I found myself looking in exactly the right direction. My blood froze in my veins when I looked at the indicated course. There was only one building in the right place, and at about the right distance. There was a huge logo of an international courier company on it. When my brain made connections, now Dave's plan was obvious. He sent his switched-on phone with a power bank through a courier service to where his wayward but stupid wife would follow. Suddenly, Dave's goal of leaving me a small amount of money made sense. He wanted me to be able to go that far. But two things struck me. Firstly, that Dave knew me well enough to know that I would immediately give chase, and secondly, Dave really wasn't in the mood to forget. But it's some kind of stupid revenge to throw me on the other side of the world. What's the point? He doesn't think I'll get lost and end up on a desert island having no other way out. I continued my way to the customs office. Now I'm going to buy a return flight ticket to get out of here and sit at the airport until it's time to go home. What other choice did I have? No, I didn't have the money to stay anywhere, and I might have to walk home from Melbourne Airport. That dawned on me. I called my Michael. He answered after a few weary seconds. I was ashamed to ask him, but there was no way. Mike, could you transfer some money to my card for me? No, he said shortly and hung up. Everyone betrayed me. That's it. I stood at the end of the queue at Thai Customs. I'd been exhausted from the chase for the last 2 days. The lower back was tied in a knot. The stomach did not know whether it wanted to be empty or to be full. And then I noticed 2 heavily armed policemen walking slowly along the queue. They were constantly looking at some photo, and then carefully at each woman. Their faces lit up with joy when they saw me. Dave Brown tiptoed out of the bedroom where his 2 charming daughters had finally fallen asleep, sat down in a comfortable old armchair, and poured himself some whiskey. He wasn't used to being alone and couldn't decide whether to watch an old movie or read a book. It was a relaxing couple of days at a local resort with his work partner Bill, with Bill's wife Nancy, and with their son. This boy was about the same age as he did. The only concern these days was to keep an eye on the 2 girls enjoying the pool's water park, ice cream, and other amenities. Arriving home at 2 in the morning when Bill was carrying the sleeping girls to their bedrooms took its toll, and he doubted that he would last long reading or watching a movie. His thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of his home phone. "Ma, Dave Brown here," Dave muttered. "Hello, my name is Jack Bloodstone. I'm from the Australian consulate in Bangkok. I'm calling about your wife, Cindy Brown," Jack introduced himself. Dave interrupted him before Jack could explain the reason for his call, saying, "You see, Cindy Brown is still officially my wife, but we broke up. Mr. Bloodstone, if she has any problems, I don't feel obligated to help her with anything." "Are you aware, Mr. Brown, of your ex-wife's money problems?" Jack asked. "Yes, it would be correct to say that she had money problems after leaving for another man," Dave acknowledged. "Wait, are you calling from Bangkok?" Dave questioned. Well, it's a sad story. Do you think she is so desperate for money to act as a courier, that is, to transport half a kilo of substances?" "I don't know my ex-wife. She is somewhat unpredictable. Everything can be. Perhaps she knows people who could give her half a kilo of marijuana. I recently found out that she was hanging out with all sorts of dubious types with a dark past." Dave pondered aloud. So you said Thailand?" Dave questioned again. "Yes, Mr. Brown. Of course, if she is found guilty, she will face 15 years in a Thai prison, which I can assure you is not at all like an Australian one." 15 years, Jack explained. "Oh my God, that's very bad, isn't it? My God, she's completely..." "The Australian government will provide her with a lawyer if she cannot pay for it herself." "Yes, I suppose she will have to rely on a legal advisor provided by the government. Or if you want, I can give you some phone numbers of her family." "So I'll clarify, aren't you going to help your wife?" Dave responded, concerned. "No, I'm not going to. It's a pity, of course, for a woman. But as I said, we broke up. I have a request, please keep me informed. It will be necessary to say something to our daughter," Dave said. "As you wish, Mr. Brown. I'll write you an email." "Could you please provide the phone numbers of her family, as you suggested earlier?" Jack requested. Dave dictated the phone numbers of Cindy's parents and her sister, adding, "I'll be waiting for your call. My cell phone number." "I'll be in touch, Mr. Brown. Goodbye," Jack concluded. Dave hung up the phone and leaned back in his chair. Something pricked his leg. He reached out and took 3 screws out of his pocket. Such nickel-plated screws were usually used to attach handles to a suitcase. He put them on the table next to the chair and smiled. Oh, the agony of choice, Dave thought. Send photos to Michael's wife now or postpone it until tomorrow. Tomorrow will be a day, there will be a fresh head, and everything will be posted. As soon as Cindy is convicted, he will think about sending her some reading material, for example, her diaries, which he found. He first looked at them when Cindy was unpacking the things they had taken from her mother's house after the funeral. Cindy acted like she didn't want Dave to know they existed. She grabbed her notebooks and ran into the bedroom. When she returned, she irritably reprimanded him about how it was not good to read other people's notes. This behavior caused alarm. If she had been calm, he wouldn't have thought of them. He had to admit that she hid them well. It took him 2 weeks of searching to get them. Reading her barely disguised hints about the first 3 novels, Dave knew that she would get lost again, and he would be able to get absolute proof. Not only for himself, but also for his daughters. He knew that in the coming years he would need both, so that his daughters would understand and forgive him for what he was going to do. It's funny how trust can make you blind, because as soon as he started looking for signs of her infidelity, he found them almost immediately. The rest, as they say, is a matter of technique. Taking a glass, he set the alcohol down and a couple of tears rolled down his cheeks. Dave, in spite of everything, had difficulty coming up with a plan for his revenge. The difficulty was not in the organizational details, it was just that simple. He knew Cindy as well as he knew himself, and could predict her actions in a given situation with 100% probability. The difficulty lay in his shattered condition. He couldn't physically do that to her, and he constantly had to remind himself what awaited him in the case of an ordinary divorce. Loss of home, money, comfort, and, most importantly, the loss of his girls. And what good can children get if their mother starts openly jumping from bed to bed, at the same time risking both their health and the well-being of their dog? What lesson will she teach them by her behavior? How? Will her changing fans treat the girls? These thoughts decided the fate of his wife. Dave raised his glass and held it up to the photograph of him and Cindy on their wedding day, which was displayed in a place of honor above the fireplace. "I'm sorry, dear, but you deserve it," he whispered. All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned, and let's dive in. For some background here, I had a wife when I was 24 years old, and she was 19. We got serious, got married, and had 2 kids in a relatively short period of time. Smack. Why the rush? Take your time, gentlemen. I went to college, thank God, got a job with the potential for a good career. I made enough money for us to live reasonably well, not rich though, on my salary alone. She did not go to college. She never had any issues holding a job, but she never had a high-paying one either. After our first son was born, she stopped working to stay at home to be a full-time mother. Then we had our daughter, and that meant that she was completely finished with work. We spent the next 15 years living a very normal life and were a relatively normal family. Okay, so you took care of everything. She was a stay-at-home mom, raised the kids, all that. I'm guessing you are definitely, at least when all this goes down here, you were, no doubts. I'm not sure if you're going to get a new one. When we were sitting on the deck watching the dog run around the backyard like a lunatic, the kids were both in school. She stood up, pulled her phone out, and started making a video of the dog. I stood right behind her, put my arms around her stomach, and lowered my chin to rest on her shoulder. So one of these tender moments, taking it all in, the dog, the backyard, the life, and watch what happens. I went back and forth between watching the dog directly and looking at him through her phone. It was after about 10 seconds that she received a drop-down message notification. It wasn't from a number, so it was clearly someone in her contacts. But since my eyes focused on the text, I didn't see the sender. She pushed it up with her thumb extremely fast. While it was too fast for me to read it, I definitely caught a few words, particularly wild and next time. Well, most people, I'm sure you know, would stop and see what the message is all about, if it was some random thing. So she's like, "Whoops, what timing, huh?" I asked who it was and she said, "I don't know, bullcrap." Boom. That was when my instincts immediately went into high alert. In all our years together, she had never done or said anything that filled my stomach and made me feel such instant apprehension and dread. I momentarily became physically weak. My mind exploded with many simultaneous thoughts, such as, how do you not know? I brushed off texts from people in the exact same manner plenty of times. I couldn't possibly not know who. It was sent by, even if I tried. You can't help but instantly recognize the sender in just a tiny fraction of a second. Number 2. There's no way that this inconsequential dog video takes priority over an incoming text of an unknown nature. She already had many short videos of that dog on her phone. While they were all nice, no individual video is so special or precious that it would really matter much if it was deleted. Number 3. I instantly recalled an incident from a couple of years prior. I didn't think much of it at the time. To keep it short, I'll just say that she acted a little out of character when I wanted to use her phone. My battery had just died a couple of years or a couple of weeks before. Okay, between those thoughts and the words that I caught, I realized I had to act right now. I put my hand on her phone and squeezed it with enough strength, making it clear that I was taking it from her. As soon as she protested, I took it by force. She attempted to resist at first, but immediately realized the futility of that. You can't take my phone. I took her phone inside, putting in all her passwords, and that's when the second gut punch hit me. As you probably guessed, the password had been changed. Of course it had. And meanwhile, she's probably banging on the freaking door, let me in, to put that into context. Neither of us had ever used anything but the same passwords before in all the years we'd been together, whether it was our smartphones, laptops, or desktops. There was nothing insignificant. Then I asked her what her password was. The third gut punch, rather than give it to me, she asked why. I'm sure that to many of you, changing your password and asking why may seem perfectly normal, but not to us. Given the nature of our relationship over the last 20 years, this is practically a definitive confession that something horrible had happened, and all the evidence was right there in her phone. All the secrets of the world can be found in someone's phone or browser history. I answered her with, to inspect every single thing that you have on here. She had stuttered and stammered like she knew she needed to say something, but had no idea what. I cut her off until I point-blanked that I was keeping her phone, and she wouldn't get it back until after I went through it. So this guy, he's not messing around, and good for him. And clearly, she's shocked by this. This is not what she expected if she ever did get caught. Clearly, she didn't plan on this. She then said, "Why are you doing this?" I answered with, "What's the password?" And she answered with something that neither of us had ever heard or so I thought ever would hear. "None of your business." "I'm making it my business, sugar muffin." At this point, I realized that the conversation was absolutely pointless. I grabbed my jacket and started heading out. She asked me where I was going, and I couldn't help but throw her words right back at her. I said, "None of your business." I knew I had to get her phone unlocked. While I certainly am a competent guy, I am not a tech guy, and I didn't know where to begin. Can I do it myself? Do I go to Verizon? Do I go to Apple? Do I go to a third party? Will there be legal concerns? Then I immediately thought of an absolute diabolical idea. My wife is clearly terrified at the thought of me leaving by myself with her phone, so I'd rather she come along with me. She asked where we were going, and I just said, "Just for a drive." She agreed, and I told her I didn't want to talk about anything, so the drive was quiet. Meanwhile, I'm kind of surprised she's not like trying to tackle you in the front yard in front of the neighbors for her phone. As far as I was concerned, the silent drive just added to my belief that she had done something unspeakable. If you think about it, my behavior over the last 20 minutes was absolutely out of control. If she was innocent, she would have been horrified and furious at what I was doing to her. But no, instead of telling me what a monster I was, expressing her shock and disbelief that I was even capable of behaving in this way, it seemed like her only genuine concern was what ultimately happened with her phone. Well, I've done plenty of stories where the wives, girlfriends, whatever, were guilty as hell, but they still put on the act that, "You're such a monster, you're such in a hole, how dare you not trust me?" You all get the point. So just because she wasn't doing that doesn't mean that, I drove to a public park located about 3 miles from the house. Since it was a weekday and the weather was chilly, the park was practically empty. I opened the door and got out without saying anything. She started to say something, but I completely ignored her. Then she got out of the car and started coming around to my side. After she took a few steps, I quickly opened my door, got back in the car, and locked the doors. "Well, you mentioned it's cold outside," I remarked. She became absolutely distraught and asked what I was doing. I told her that she was either going to give me the password or I was going to leave her here with no phone and no ride. So, this is funny, but you all can imagine how this could go very bad for him if you think about it. In hindsight, I really was ashamed that I wasn't in the right state of mind to properly enjoy and appreciate her absolutely epic and glorious meltdown. Considering that I was only 30 minutes into what was ultimately the absolute destruction of my life as I knew it, I wasn't able to enjoy any satisfaction whatsoever. At least I was fortunate enough to witness it. At that point, I started to feel a little bit guilty and began to second-guess myself. But those thoughts were immediately dismissed by the realization that she should have ended all this. She could have ended this at any moment simply by giving me the password. Because you're having a battle of wills here, man, and she's not going to budge. I told her through the barely cracked window that I was going to get in her phone to go through everything, and that nothing could be done to stop me. I told her that the only thing she has any control over is whether she gets a ride back to the house or gets stranded. And of course, the only way to get a ride home was to give me the password. Dude, you're not effing around, are you? You have to play hardball. That's what is respected. That's just how it is. I then started the car and told her that I'd be driving away in 10 seconds and I wouldn't be looking back. After 10 seconds, I put the car in drive, took my foot off the brake, and the car slowly started moving forward. She's still standing her ground, she's not budging. I was quite concerned that she would throw herself in front of the car to stop me. Laughs. That's actually pretty funny, you're driving away and she's on the windshield, you know? Thankfully, she's not. After the car slowly rolled a few feet, she finally gave me the password. It's about ducking time, you stubborn jackass, she exclaimed. I stopped the car, put it in park, and unlocked the phone. I told her that I wouldn't let her in until after I went through everything. Then I shut the window. She tried talking loud, so I just blasted the radio. She shut up, walked away, and sat on the park bench. I finally started digging through her phone. It turns out that she has been having you-know-what with a coworker. Upon confirming this, I became ill and had to stop looking at the phone. I took a moment to regain focus and then continued. It didn't take long for me to find a picture of them. He looked like he was only a few years older than our son. So that was a young guy at work. He is giving her some cougar action. Their wife is probably in her early 42nds at this point, and he's only a few years older than your son, so he's like half her age, half your age. And probably her big giant ego boost to make her feel like she's not getting old, and she's still attractive, tension and validation. You get to the point, and you've got all the info right here. I wasn't interested in details like how long it had been going on and what kind of feelings she had for him. Instead, I needed to find the most damaging things that I could, so that I could absolutely destroy and humiliate her to every single person that she knew. And guys, he's not joking, he's not exaggerating here. I told you, scorched earth. I want you to imagine. I went to the private folder of photos that requires you to re-enter the password. I mainly found more pictures, along with a short video that made me absolutely sick. These morons record everything. It never ceases to amaze me how they document their actions and conversations on their phones. You know damn well she's showing. This to all her ducking girlfriends, they're all comparing notes. At this point, I realized I couldn't give her back the phone and was absolutely no way I was letting her back in the car. So I did exactly what I promised I wouldn't do if she gave me her password. I drove off and left her stranded without her phone. I didn't even look back in the mirror. Again, this could have blown up in my face. Fortunately, it did not. Upon arriving home, I changed the password on her phone so that only I could access it. I knew I would be keeping her phone indefinitely. I sent the video, the pictures, and the screenshots of some of the texts to my phone, then to my email, so I had multiple copies in case anything were to somehow disappear. My son came out while I was doing this, and I figured there was no point in waiting. I said, "Sit down. I've got to tell you something major." So you're immediately controlling the narrative. You're not letting her get to the kids first or anybody else. That's the smart way to go. I told him point blank that I just discovered that his mom has been having you-know-what with a young 20-something from her work, and then it's something that most people might think was outrageously inappropriate, and I don't disagree. Gee, can you guys all guess what he's about to do here? I figured it out the first time reading it, but I don't care either. I held out my phone and showed him a picture of the two of them together, completely unclothed. Something no kid ever wants to see is mom unclothed, probably with her mouth in certain places that we don't want to think about our mothers doing. My son was in absolute shock. Yeah, no crap, Dad. He had no words. I told him that none of this would have an effect on our relationship. I don't know about that, dude. Just showing him a picture of his mom getting ducked in many which ways to the sun, he may think a little differently of you for showing him that. Yeah, you've got to get it out of his head. He's going to have to be ducking hypnotized or something to get that crap out of his head. Every time he looks at his mom, he's going to be like, "Oh, I can see she used to ducking Aquafresh." Then I told him that I was sorry to have to say this, but the truth is that his mother is nothing but a dirty witch. I'm going to divorce her immediately. I told him that he'll be free to live with whichever one of us he wants to. Gee, tough decision. I told him that I was sorry to be dropping all of this on him out of nowhere, but I just discovered all of this myself only a couple of hours ago. I told him that the picture I showed him was one of many and that his mother's phone had more than enough indisputable evidence, including a video, to prove that everything I told him was 100% true. That's all, and he was free to look through the phone himself. I think one picture is enough, Dad, for him to get the point. He said, but I understood if he didn't want to. You think? He did not. He said the picture was all he needed to see. I asked him how I should tell his sister, probably not showing her the pictures again. He said that he would take care of that, and I agreed. My wife eventually made it home. To this day, I don't know how or care how. I told her that I'm going to think about speaking to her and to take everything she needed from my bedroom and move into the spare bedroom. Well, good for you. In all these stories, usually it's the husband that moves into the spare bedroom, or the cottage, or the goddamn couch in the basement that's, 75 years old. No, she can leave. Good. And to take everything she needs from my bedroom. But my son just looked at her in disbelief, and of course the waterworks began. Of course, 1 out of 1,000 aggro falls. He told her to stay away from him, and she went directly upstairs. A while later, our daughter arrived home. My son immediately took charge and told her to come outside with him for a moment. Yeah, because your son didn't want you to show more of your life's adventures on her phone. He grabbed his mother's phone, so I gave him the password. I couldn't hear anything my son said, but oh my God, I could hear my daughter. Okay, maybe he did show her the wife. Obviously, she could too, because the cries from upstairs were loud and clear in the kitchen. Oh, I can only imagine the noise coming from the spare bedroom where she was like, "Shut the duck up." I'm watching the playoffs. The next few days were surprisingly uneventful. The wife stayed away from me, the kids ignored her, and she actually didn't spend all her time begging for forgiveness. At least not after her initial attempts were rejected. She just stayed in the guest room, only leaving to eat and use the bathroom. We had a landline in the house, and she was able to call her work and tell them that she needed time off. She used the landline just enough that her cell phone wasn't getting blown up by people trying to reach her. I think one reason she kept her cell and didn't bother me was that my behavior when I took her phone from her generally terrified her in a way she was coming to terms with the realization that I wasn't the person she thought I was, just like I was about her. In other words, she probably never in a million years thought that you would handle things the way you did, in terms of when the thing popped up on the phone and you were suspicious. She didn't expect that, and also you going scorched earth. By the way, we're not done with him scorching earth, guys. We're just getting started. The kids were handling it surprisingly well. Other than completely ignoring their mom, my son acted relatively normal. My daughter was more set. She referred to her mother as the witch. Upon hearing that, I slightly chuckled in a low-key way that made it clear she had my blessing to use that term. It's likely that your son is more likely to forgive the mom, or at least move on and have a relationship with her than the daughter. Because while I've done plenty of stories where the daughters stick with the mothers, there are other stories where the daughters truly have a great relationship with their fathers. When they find out what the mother's done to the father and the family, there ain't no forgiving the mother from the daughter. Oh. I know a lot of you guys have heard those stories. I'm very thankful that nothing ever happened. When the kids were younger, I put a key lock on my bedroom door, so she had absolutely no access. I also took time off work. At first, I just stayed mostly in my room, thinking about things and digging more into her phone. The digging didn't turn up anything new. After a couple of days, I was feeling sorry for myself. I was ready to finally start destroying her. We had a small friend group that consists of couples. I called my closest friend from the group and told him everything. I sent him 2 of the most humiliating pictures she had, along with screenshots of a few texts, and told him that nothing would make me happier than him sharing them with everyone. Remember, gentlemen, these pictures on her phone didn't appear by magic. She willingly archived her events with this young lad and stored them on her phone. I know that from a legal standpoint, that was not a good idea. But in that particular moment, I didn't give a crap at all. I was expecting her phone to start blowing up at some point, but no, it's like everyone just cut her off without even trying to reach out to her. To this day, I'm still friends with some of them. None of them talk to her. It's kind of interesting. Well, the ones that don't talk to you, I wonder if their wives knew what was going on or were up to no good themselves. Who knows? Next, I had to tell her parents. Oh, Jesus. I decided to tell her mother, and then her mother could handle telling her father. As I had done with my friend, I sent her mother the 2 pictures in the same text. I told her that there were plenty more, including a graphic video, that I would happily send upon request. She declined. I think her mother-in-law got the point with the 2 pictures. I always had a positive relationship with the in-laws, so it was unfortunate I had to say what I had to say next. I learned that while I was allowing her to be the one to tell her husband out of respect, I would take matters into my own hands if she did not. I would not allow for him to be unaware of what was actually happening. I asked her not to give him the watered-down version of events. I also let her know that I would not tolerate him being told anything that would remotely suggest that he bore any blame. Yeah, if you weren't careful, believe me, your wife would have twisted the story a bit, you know. You're the reason she cheated. You work too much. Sure, whatever. I also let her know that her grandkids already knew, and they saw their mother's phone, so it was inevitable that giving her husband an accurate version of events would ultimately backfire at some point. Or an inaccurate version of the events would backfire at some point in the future. She was actually appalled that I let the kids see the phone. Yeah, personally, I wouldn't have shown the son and the kids the phone. Laughs. Yeah, personally, I wouldn't have shown the son and the kids the pictures. I would have made it clear, and I didn't believe you if they didn't believe you. That's not true, Dad. I've got proof. No, not my mother. Okay, son, here she is. There's your mom's mouth. Then, only then, would I do that. But I wouldn't willingly, even as pissed off as I would be. That's the only thing I know we look at, all as we rely on agreements and disagreements about that particular subject there. They deserve to know, but if they wanted to see the pictures, fine. I told her that, understand, I agree that it probably was. But I also told her that I have no regrets about doing it. I told her that my top priority was to make sure that the kids knew the truth and were not given any false versions of what happened. At the end of the call, we were on good terms. Sadly, I haven't communicated with either of them ever since. It is unfortunate because you said you had a good relationship with them, but at the end of the day, they'd be really pissed off and disappointed in their daughter, but they're going to choose her, of course, well, most of the time. After that, I made an appointment with a divorce lawyer. Alright, to be honest, this is kind of where the story ends. I said that because nothing really crazy or dramatic happened from that point on. The wife moved to her parents and still lives with them to this day. She didn't contest the divorce. She could have gotten alimony, but the kids told her that they would hate her guts forever if she came after my money after destroying our family. Her parents have quite a bit of money, and she's their only child, so she's quite spoiled. She's financially well off. Sometimes I wish her parents had been stricter with her, but then again, maybe I'd be paying even more if they had. Both kids stayed with me until they moved out. I sold the house and gave her the cheating witch her portion I couldn't resist. She got her share of the profit as per our divorce agreement. It was a substantial amount, and you can bet I kept the dog. R.I.P. Buster. Eventually, the kids let their mother back into their lives, but it was never quite the same. My son put it best when he told me that he had forgiven her, but he would never forget. I've stayed single, having had a couple of flings since then, but nothing more than that. The kids are doing just fine.
Story 3.
I'm out of here, I declared. Fine, and don't bother coming back, my wife shot back. Normally, I'd toss out a go to hell as I stormed out. But today I aimed for more civilized parting words. We've slung similar barbs over our 14 years hitched, but this time I won't be circling back. In a few days, she'll grasp what I meant this round. Over the past half year or so, Jenna, my wife, turned into a verbal wrecking ball. I couldn't figure it. Her jabs, to put it mildly, stung. I started dodging her to keep things from boiling over. Each day I'd stall longer in the car. Sometimes I'd slip back home after Jenna and Carrie, our 13-year-old, finished supper. I had to take care of me. Sometimes there'd be leftovers. Lately, though, it seems they've vanished before I return. I go by Kurt Kaminsky. Technically, it's David Kurt Kaminsky, but my old man's also a David, so they dubbed me Kurt from the start to sidestep confusion. Nope, not a junior. Dad's David John Kaminsky. Why he skipped the junior bit, I can't fathom. I'd happily answer to junior or even DJ. But nope, just Kurt or Nada. Yep. I'm Polish. Well, sorta an American with Polish roots. Heard all the jokes. Well, most of them. They keep churning out new ones each year. As the lone Pole I know, apart from Dad, in this 10,000 strong town, I've become the punchline. Technically, I'm half Polish. The other half from Mom's side is German, French, Irish, and English. But since I'm a Kaminsky, I'm Pole. My soon-to-be ex-wife ain't who I thought. I only caught wind of this 4 weeks back. As I said, I was keeping clear of her due to the misuse. After a few dinners, MIA, one Monday evening, I hit a diner. In a booth, ready to order, I overheard two guys chatting in the next booth. Caught a phrase with Pole and tuned in. So, how long you been with the Paulus missus? Since they tied the knot? Heck, I even betted her on their wedding day and he's clueless. The first voice, unknown, but the second, I knew. My best bud, George Carey. I froze. They kept yakking, but I heard zilch until George spilled, "Yeah, we rendezvous at least twice a month. Kurt's so clueless in the lot, he's none the wiser. Dumb luck." Just then, the waitress came to take my order. Quietly, I murmured, "Sorry, got a jet." I bolted, making sure they didn't catch sight of me. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Jenna, my wife with my closest buddy, the guy who stood by me at the altar. He's also my go-to mechanic, and that's not changing anytime soon. Well, not officially my mechanic, more like an exclusive contractor I rely on solely to fix and inspect all my cars. In case you're wondering, I run a used car dealership. Yeah, I'm a used car salesman. Heard all the jokes and jabs. But business is booming. People trust they're getting top-notch cars at fair prices, and if any issues crop up, I handle them. George has always been a top-notch mechanic, and I keep him busy and compensated well. I wanted to bring him on as staff, but he cracked a joke about not respecting himself if he worked for a Pole. Said it in jest, but I sensed he meant it. Still, I took him on as an independent contractor, though he wasn't all that independent. Truth is, I was his sole source of income, and that fact will be his undoing. Leaving the diner, I cruised the streets, doubting what I'd heard. Was it true or just his boasting? They might have hired a PI. But if what he said was legit, their meetups were sparse. Might end up a waste of cash. But I decided to snoop through her phone and email. Back home, Jenna was her usual self. Fine by me. I needed the truth before talking to her. Once she dozed off, I checked her email. Clean. Her phone was locked, but it didn't take me long to crack it. Our daughter's birth date. Found a few sketchy messages, but nothing from George. His name in her contacts wasn't odd, considering he was my pal. Maybe he was just talking trash, I thought. Yet her recent behavior hinted something's amiss. Perhaps not with George, but someone else. I hit the hay, restless. It was past 2:43 a.m. when I finally drifted off. The next day at the dealership, George cracked his usual Polish jokes. I usually let them slide, but today I snapped. "George, what do you even know about Poland? Bet you couldn't find it on a map if your life depended on it. You joke about Poles being dim, but I'm sure they could locate the U.S., maybe even our state. Get to work." George stared, lost for words. He knew I was onto something. He wasn't the academic type, more street smart, good with engines, not textbooks. I guess that's why we hung out in high school. I'd help him with his studies, ensuring he graduated. Now, I'm reconsidering our friendship. He got me thinking about picking a spouse. I retreated to my office, shut the door, and mulled over how to gather evidence. Confronting them both head-on wouldn't fly. They'd just brush it off. I needed solid proof. I rang up a PI in Santa Fe and laid out my worries. He reckoned monitoring them would cost a pretty penny given their sporadic meetups. "You could slap a tracker on her phone. At least you'll know its whereabouts when you check, or set up cameras at home. But unless they're top-notch, and by that I mean pricey, they'll likely get spotted. Even with fancy gear, if she's alert, she'll probably catch on. If I were you, I'd tag her phone and hope to catch them red-handed." He suggested a tracking program and waived off payment. "Consider it a freebie," he said. "Everything I told you is online anyway." "Still, you came through with valuable advice. Expect a check," I insisted. "If you ever swing by Silver City, drop by Kaminsky's lot," he offered. "I don't usually venture out that way, but if I do, I'll look you up," I replied, and I sensed he meant it. A big part of my sales success came from making folks feel important. Early on, I learned folks crave validation. I opted for the tracking software, saving cash and hassle on cameras Jenna might spot. That night, when everyone was out cold, I sneaked up and installed the tracking app on her phone, syncing it with mine. It'll run in the background unbeknownst to her. Finally, I slept soundly. Next day at work, I kept tabs on the app. Jenna worked part-time at the uni bookstore, 15 to 20 hours a week. She called her earnings mad money and splurged at the salon. She hit the grocery store and later was back home. George was home most of the day, but whenever Jenna was in, he was out working. So at least for that day, I figured nothing had gone down. That evening, I tried being more civil to my wife and daughter. Suggesting dinner out, my wife seemed somewhat responsive. Our daughter, typical teen, hesitated, but I insisted. Dinner went smoothly. I casually brought up George, and Jenna shifted uncomfortably, swiftly changing the subject, fueling my suspicions. "I want to find out if George's words hold water. I've got to get to the bottom of this somehow." That night, I refrained from checking her phone. My attempts to peek at her calls or texts came up empty. Either she swiftly deleted them or didn't make any at all. Climbing into bed, I thanked Jenna. "Thanks for joining us for dinner." "Thank you, Kurt. It was a nice surprise," she replied, meeting my gaze. "You might be in luck tonight. It's been a while. And like I mentioned, we haven't been getting along lately." After her usual nightly routine in the bathroom, Jenna nestled beside me. I felt conflicted about the possibility of closeness with her. If she had been unfaithful, did I even want it? I resolved to let her take the lead until I had solid evidence. I wouldn't initiate. We did end up being physically engaged, but it was rather ordinary. No need for specifics. Well, at least I enjoyed it. Throughout the week, I kept tabs on her phone's location, finding nothing out of the ordinary. On Saturday night, while she slept, I checked her phone for any messages or calls, yet again finding nothing. I was close to convincing myself that George was just blowing smoke, trying to impress someone with his tales of conquests. This wasn't the first time I'd known him to do so since our school days. I tossed and turned in bed once more, my subconscious refusing to let me sleep. At 2 a.m., I lay there, staring at the ceiling, unable to drift off. I decided to go downstairs for a drink, hoping it might help me relax. Sitting with a glass of Jack Daniels and Coke in one hand and her phone in the other, I decided to check it once more. Entering the password, our daughter's birth date, I opened her phone to the homepage. Suddenly, it hit me like a bolt of lightning. Our daughter's birth date was the key. Jenna's pregnancy had been challenging. We had feared losing her several times due to complications. There was an issue with her Rh factor not matching Jenna's, causing her body to reject the baby. Jenna spent the last 3 weeks of the pregnancy on bed rest to ensure the baby's safe delivery. And indeed, Carrie was born exactly 9 months after our wedding. We were overjoyed at her health, but she proved to be a demanding child. She cried incessantly, had trouble sleeping, and struggled with nursing. It was tough going. In Carrie's second year, Jenna firmly declared we weren't having another child. It saddened me, but truthfully, the baby had drained much of the joy from our lives. I mentioned that she was born 9 months after our wedding. They call such children wedding night babies because they're conceived on that night or during the honeymoon. A light bulb went off in my head. If George's claims were true, then there was a strong chance Jenna was already pregnant. Before our wedding night, Jenna was on the pill. No, we didn't wait until marriage to be physically engaged. It was a significant part of our relationship. The doctor speculated that the stress of the wedding might have interfered with her hormones, rendering the pills ineffective. Well, if the pills failed that night, they likely failed that day too. Now I know what to do. There's a 50 chance I'm not the father. You know the saying, the early bird gets the worm? Well, George might have been an early bird, but in his case, it seems the early worm gets the birdie. I got off the couch and headed to the bathroom where I found some cotton swabs. Carrie was fast asleep in her room. She finally settled into a good sleep routine at 4 years old. Before that, it was a struggle. She lay there snoring with her mouth open. It was simple to gently swab the inside of her cheek with a Q-tip. She didn't even stir. After sealing it in a plastic bag, I repeated the process for myself. Even if Carrie turned out to be my biological daughter, it still left questions about Jenna's faithfulness if she wasn't. But I pushed those thoughts aside for later consideration. Sunday was for chores, and we each had our tasks. I took my time, avoiding Jenna and Carrie to keep my emotions in check. I was anxious to confirm my suspicions, but plagued by doubt all day. "Something on your mind, Kurt?" Jenna inquired. I needed a quick answer, so I replied, "I'm planning to buy a bunch of cars at the next auction to stock up the lot. Money might be tight until I make some sales." "Just don't overextend," she advised, always referring to the business as ours, though it was really mine. I'd set it up as a separate entity to protect my personal finances. Living in a religious community, I didn't want business decisions to affect my personal life negatively. "I'm thinking of paying off the credit cards and keeping only one open to improve our credit," I told her. It was a tactic to mask my strategy in case she found out about it later. "Do what you think is best," she responded indifferently. The idea came to me in a flash. It's amazing what your mind can do when you let it. This would minimize fallout if my suspicions proved true. So, bright and early Monday, I took the samples to Western New Mexico University and spoke with someone in the science department. They directed me to the department head, who welcomed the opportunity. I handed over some business cards and offered a 10% discount to anyone working on the samples. He seemed appreciative. "I've been eyeing a new car to replace my Camry. I might swing by and check out your selection. If nothing catches my eye, I'll work with you to find something," I mentioned. "Thank you, I'll keep that in mind," he replied. As I left the university, I knew I wore a smile, but it was tinged with worry. The test results could spell the end of my marriage. When I mentioned buying new cars to Jenna, it was merely a cover-up for my troubled thoughts. Yet, the idea started to grow on me. I summoned Paul, my accountant, loan officer, and occasional salesperson, into my office and shared my plans. "We're going to make this work," I assured him. "There's something else, Paul," I continued. "I want to clear the mortgage on my house. Can we work out a lump sum payment?" "Let me crunch the numbers and get back to you after lunch," he replied, exiting my office. As he left, I pondered contacting my lawyer for a family law referral. But then I hesitated, thinking, hold your horses, let's see the results first. I've yet to find concrete evidence of infidelity. After lunch, Paul presented the spreadsheet and we discussed the next moves for both plans. The following 2 days dragged on, each moment filled with anticipation for the DNA test results. Late Wednesday evening, the department head phoned, confirming the outcome and arranging to visit to discuss the car. When he arrived, I ushered him into my office. His expression said it all before he even spoke. "The samples aren't related," he confirmed. I nodded, though the news hit hard even though I'd half expected it. He gave me a moment before handing over the envelope with the results. When I glanced back up, my demeanor shifted. "So, about that car you were eyeing?" I inquired. "Well, it might sound cliché, but I've hit the big 5.0 and I'm eyeing a sports car. Thinking a Mazda Miata," I shared. Though I didn't have one in stock, I promised to scour the auction the next day for a well-kept one. "I'll ring you this afternoon with any updates," I assured him as he left. I've told Anna I might leave early, but I'll be reachable if needed, I thought to myself, knowing she wouldn't call. She rarely required my assistance. She handled most tasks herself. As I drove around the city, everything seemed different. I made a call to my lawyer, who, though saddened by the news, directed me to a colleague he trusted. After the call, I booked an evening appointment. The next day, over a snack at a restaurant, I reflected, have I truly squandered the past 15 years? I couldn't even claim to have a child from this marriage. While I still regarded her as my child to some extent, biologically she wasn't mine. What to do next? I couldn't pretend ignorance anymore. I'd been aware before, but now, there was no turning back. One thing I was certain of, George would face consequences. It didn't matter that he'd been my closest friend for years. With friends like him, enemies seemed preferable. Jenna, too, would face repercussions. I wondered if she was aware that Carrie wasn't mine. Even if she wasn't, she kept this truth hidden from me. The secret of her infidelity on our wedding day with my best man, my supposed friend. Now I had no reason to doubt what I'd overheard. She indulged with him at least twice monthly. Anger began to well up inside me, and before it spiraled out of control, I knew I needed solitude, away from everyone. I should have called Jenna, informing her I wouldn't be home that evening. Going home was out of the question. I feared I might do something that would land me in jail. She picked up the call. "Hello? Kurt? Hey, I'll be spending the night in Albuquerque to prep for the auction tomorrow at 8. "Oh," I responded flatly. "Well, okay then. Have a safe trip." I rarely ventured to Albuquerque for auctions, so this deviation was notable. I wondered if she'd exploit my absence for the night. She'd have to come up with an excuse regarding Carrie from my parents, which wouldn't be easy to explain. Nevertheless, I'd intermittently check her phone tracker throughout the evening to see if she ventured elsewhere. I navigated the roads to Albuquerque, aiming to purchase at least 20 cars, including a Mazda Miata. I'd arranged for their pickup and delivery to my lot post-auction. Now, the dilemma was who to entrust for their mechanical inspection. I knew George wouldn't get any further business from me once his current routine inspections and repairs were done. Upon hearing I'd acquired 24 cars, he'd likely envision dollar signs and inflate his charges. But that wasn't going to happen. I'd keep it under wraps until the last minute. I needed to consult with a local auction dealer to identify someone skilled and dependable to inspect them before shipping to our small town. Arriving in Albuquerque around 9 a.m., I checked into a Best Western hotel. Despite being the owner, I couldn't justify splurging on an expensive hotel using company funds. The room was comfortable, as was the bed. Just what I needed. I'm a simple person with simple needs. Upon entering the room, I immediately checked Jenna's phone tracker, discovering she was still at home, or at least her phone was. Sleep proved elusive that night. I couldn't shake off thoughts about her actions and motivations. How could she justify her affair, especially on our wedding day, and continue it for who knows how long? I started to reassess our marriage. It was never perfect, but I believed in our exclusive love. Now I realized it was a mistake from the very beginning. In the initial years following the wedding, things weren't smooth sailing. Naturally, we didn't anticipate a baby right away. Our original plan was to wait 3 to 4 years before starting a family. We had agreed on having 3 children before tying the knot. However, Carrie's arrival disrupted these plans. Learning that my best friend was the cause of this disruption made all the struggles seem futile. 14 years of effort seemed wasted, despite the good times we'd had being overshadowed by this revelation. If Jenna hadn't been involved with George, perhaps she would have conceived with me. Maybe her pregnancy wouldn't have been as difficult, and we wouldn't have had such a challenging child, leading her to not desire more children. George shattered my life when he seduced my future wife on our wedding day. Now he entertains her at least twice a month, all the while likely mocking me, the oblivious Pole. He must face consequences, I thought as I lay down, attempting to calm myself and drift off to sleep. Anger simmered within me once more. I needed to regain composure or risk a sleepless night. I turned on the TV to watch a mindless comedy show. Laughter helped soothe my nerves, and by 11 I was ready to doze off, looking ahead to a busy day. The auction went smoothly. I snagged some excellent cars at favorable prices and networked with dealers in the Albuquerque area. Spotting no Miatas at the auction, I inquired with other dealers. 2 of them had one each, one red and the other black. I negotiated potential deals, pending confirmation of my client's preferred color. Naturally, both dealers agreed, assuring me they'd handle the transaction once I provided details of the cars on my lot. I should have frequented this auction more often. Interacting with fellow businessmen in the same industry inspired me to expand my operations and provided a welcome distraction from my personal troubles. Later in the afternoon, during my meeting with the lawyer, the news wasn't encouraging. I faced losing half of my assets, along with alimony and child support payments, for a child who wasn't even mine. In that moment, I decided against pursuing a divorce. Instead, I resolved to leave her with George's child, paying off the mortgage on the house. She could remain there, but with only my name on the mortgage, she wouldn't be able to sell it. By continuing to cover taxes and utilities while living elsewhere, she wouldn't have the option to resign and claim the house. However, I needed to make a decision regarding my business. Although it was registered as a corporation, I had a gut feeling that without proper protection, I could risk losing it. Consulting my business lawyer became a priority. Arriving home, utterly exhausted from a demanding day, I informed Jenna of my fatigue. "I'm beat, planning to shower and hit the sack," I muttered, making my way to the bedroom. "Want dinner?" she inquired. "No, had a late lunch," I replied. At least she cared enough to ask. The shower was blissful, almost like my troubles were washing away. While problems persisted, I found solace in devising solutions. Minutes after my head hit the pillow, sleep enveloped me. The past week had been stressful, but with a plan in motion, I finally found mental reprieve. Rising early, feeling rejuvenated, I headed to the office before Jenna and Carrie stirred. There, amidst spreadsheets and financial reports, I orchestrated my next moves. I briefed Paul on the 23 car purchases and instructed Anna to cease assigning work to George, emphasizing the need for secrecy. She eyed me quizzically. "You're the boss," she remarked. "Thank you, Anna. You're invaluable." At 9 sharp, I phoned my business lawyer seeking advice. "Your business is registered, but she might still force a sale to claim half its value. Consider selling preemptively," he suggested. "I can't. It's my life," I retorted. "Let me mull it over and get back to you by week's end." This news hit hard. I'd poured sweat and tears into building my business, akin to raising a child. Unlike Carrie, I thought bitterly. Rage threatened to consume me again, but as a seasoned businessman, I knew to compartmentalize. I refocused on my business agenda. First up, contacting Doug, who confirmed George's claims. "Doug, Kurt Kaminsky here. I've got intel on 2 Miatas you might fancy, red and black. Still interested?" "If the price is right," he replied. "Which color do you prefer?" "Let me show you both. We'll crunch numbers afterward." "Even if we can't agree, I can sell it easily," I assured. "And your pick?" he pressed. "Red makes a bold statement, but fades faster. Black's elegant, but heats up quickly here. Planning to garage it?" "Yes," he affirmed. "Red it is then. When can we meet?" "Monday or Tuesday." "Perfect. Call upon arrival." "Deal." After hanging up, I dialed the dealer with the red Miata to negotiate a swap. He showed interest in the BMW sitting on my lot for 3 months, recognizing its better prospects in a larger city. Meanwhile, George showed up with several cars still awaiting repairs. As an independent contractor, his flexible schedule suited my needs, despite my simmering anger toward him. Overhearing salesmen discussing the impending arrival of 23 cars, George inquired about the schedule. "Hey, Kurt, When are these cars from the auction coming in? I want to plan my repairs, he queried. The auction house will handle the delivery, likely late next week or early the following, I informed him tersely. Struggling to keep calm in the presence of this betrayer, I managed to chuckle as he departed. That weekend, I distanced myself from Jenna, occupying myself with yard work and errands. Checking her phone tracker no longer concerned me. I harbored only contempt for her. Raising another man's child felt unforgivable. Monday found me back at the car show. I arranged to trade the BMW for the Miata, setting off to Albuquerque to finalize the deal. We'll grab lunch upon your arrival, the dealer suggested. Informing Anna of my day-long absence, I instructed her to hold the fort. Got it, boss, she affirmed, her reliability shining through. A raise was in order. The journey and lunch were pleasant, forging a new camaraderie with the dealer. Driving back in the Miata, wind tousling my hair, I relished the freedom. Deciding to splurge further, I resolved to procure a black car, realizing I didn't need more than a two-seater. Soon, I pulled into our driveway in a fiery red sports car. Jenna glanced out the window and exchanged words with Carrie, prompting them both to step outside to observe. "Why do you need this car, honey? We need something with a back seat for Carrie," she remarked patronizingly. "Just picked it up from Albuquerque for a client. Thought you might want to take a ride," I responded. "No, honey, I'm not a fan of small cars," Jenna retorted with a hint of disdain. "Carrie," I called, motioning for my daughter to join us. "No, Dad, I'm already teased enough because of my last name. I don't want to be seen with a Polish used car salesman." Her words stung, typical of a teenager's bluntness. I was taken aback. Where did this disrespect come from? Glancing at Jenna, I realized she was treating Carrie's remark as inconsequential. Now, both the women in my house were showing disrespect. Teenagers might not always be close with their parents, but the hurtful manner in which she spoke made me question the authenticity of my family life. "I'm going for another drive. I'll be back soon," I announced, shifting the car into reverse and driving off. Fueled by frustration, I navigated the roads of Silver City until I returned home around 9:30. Heading straight upstairs, I took a quick shower and crawled into bed. When I didn't emerge from the shower, Jenna entered the room, casting a bright light into my eyes. Squinting, I closed my eyes. "Are you sulking because we didn't choose a sports car? Aren't you going to spend time with your family? You're not just Polish, you're childish," she chided. Her sudden attitude shift puzzled me. I couldn't shake the feeling that it stemmed from George. Spending time with him had seemingly influenced her disregard for my heritage, now passed on to our daughter. Yet, she wasn't even my daughter. Despite supporting her, I needed to accept that fact. "Looks like you and your daughter would rather do without a Pole around, so you might as well just leave," I retorted heatedly. Her demeanor only fueled my anger. She would regret treating me this way. From then on, the atmosphere in the Kaminsky household grew cold and silent. The following day, I contacted Doug, who came over to inspect the Miata. He was thrilled with it. After discussing the numbers, he was pleasantly surprised by the great deal he received. $0 less than Kelly Blue Book. As he was finishing up the paperwork, he mentioned, "My best friend handles purchasing for the university, and we rotate about 16 cars every 2 years. It might not be much, but could you speak with him? Always happy to do business, and I'll ensure he gets a good deal," I replied. "I'll have Jim reach out to you by the end of the week." "Thank you," I said. That's how I expanded my business, by treating people well and showing appreciation for their referrals. On Wednesday, my lawyer called. "Hey, Kurt, I think I have a solution to your potential issue. Can you swing by this afternoon to discuss it?" "Absolutely. I'm eager to get started." The tension at home had become unbearable. At the meeting later that day, I heard the plan and was pleased with it. It would take about 2 weeks to execute, but if successful, it would be worth it. Over those 2 weeks, I gradually moved personal items and tools from my house to an apartment nearby. Meanwhile, George awaited the arrival of the 24 cars to do some work, but I kept delaying him. During the past weekend, I did some yard work and cleared out my closet and drawers when Jenna and Carrie weren't around. Jenna did laundry during the week, so she didn't notice the emptiness of my closet. This brings me back to that Monday night. When I told Jenna I'm leaving, she once again began to show rudeness and disrespect, targeting me for being Polish and a used car salesman. In the past, I would go to a motel for a night or two, depending on my level of anger. The following Tuesday morning, I arrived at the parking lot early and gathered my employees in the conference room. It was a regular weekly meeting, so nothing seemed unusual. I began, "Good morning. As you all know, the cars I purchased a couple of weeks ago arrived yesterday afternoon. They've all been inspected and prepped, ready for sale. We won't be using George for any more work here. If he asks, just say we're going in a different direction. You've all been fantastic. You're like family to me, so it's tough to discuss what's next. Pausing to wipe a tear, I continued, I've sold the business. Surprised, they looked at me. But nothing changes regarding your roles except Anna, who will take on some of my duties and receive a corresponding raise. Despite their astonishment, they began congratulating Anna, recognizing her hard work and worthiness. Anna, please come talk to me after the meeting. There are some things we need to discuss, I said. I'll still be involved in the company, but only in an advisory capacity and may occasionally sell. I don't want to interfere with your sales, I assured her. They were all relieved that I'd still be around, even if only occasionally. After the meeting, as we exited, George stood there. Hey, why wasn't I included in the meeting? He asked, surprised. Because it was for staff only and you're not an employee, I explained. He seemed taken aback. I see the cars have arrived. I'll get to work on them, he said. No need. They've already been prepared for sale, I replied firmly, leaving him stunned. But I always check the cars, he protested. George, I've sold the business and the new owner wants to go in a different direction, I informed him, holding back my anger. I'll save that for another day. I kept it brief, realizing sometimes less is more. I can't believe you sold the business, he exclaimed, making it about himself. What now? You can pick up your check for the past 2 weeks' work. It wasn't much. Anna rarely utilized your services, I stated bluntly. He'd been expecting to work on the cars, but he was out of luck. I felt no sympathy. I just wished I could tell him what I really thought of him. When I spoke with Anna, I asked her to keep our conversation confidential. Of course, Kurt. I'll never divulge anything you don't want, she assured me. Here's the plan. I've set up companies registered in Nevada. One buys the parking lot, the other buys the company. I own all the shares in both. Eventually, I'll divorce Jenna and ensure she doesn't get the business. Why? She asked. I've moved out. Jenna doesn't know yet, but I'm not going back. She had an affair with George. In fact, Carrie isn't my daughter. I suspect she's George's. I'm not sure if Jenna knows, let alone George. They'll find out soon. I won't divorce, but I'll keep paying utilities and taxes for our house so she can't claim abandonment and take everything if she files for divorce. I don't want her to take over the business. That's why I agreed to the company being bought twice. Let them figure it out. The proceeds will be spent by the time she gets the divorce done. Plus, I barely make anything from consulting and a few commissions. Anna, you can handle daily operations. I'll be available for questions, but I trust you and your judgment, I explained. Anna smiled at the news of the new owner, but when she heard about Jenna and George, her expression turned deadly serious. This woman was someone I deeply admired and respected. I have one more task for you before I go. I need you to order a new sign and letterhead. We're changing the business name to Helpless Car. This will reinforce the idea to George and Jenna that the business is under new ownership, I explained. I spelled out the name to ensure she got it right. She looked puzzled. I'll explain the name choice someday. For now, just know it tells the whole story, I told her. Though she seemed puzzled, she trusted me enough to follow through. With that, I bid farewell to everyone and headed out. I got into my Audi and drove towards Albuquerque. About 2 hours later, I received a call from Jenna. I hadn't expected her to call so soon. This was a familiar pattern. I'd leave for a day or two, she'd call, we'd talk, and I'd return. Things would change briefly, then revert to how they were before. We'd have another argument, and the cycle would repeat. I decided to answer the call, curious to hear what she would say this time. Hello? I spoke through the car's speakerphone. Kurt, what's going on? She asked, sounding hesitant. Nothing much, just heading to Albuquerque, I replied flatly. Why are you going there? She inquired. To pick up the car, I stated without emotion. So, what I heard must not be true. George must have called you, figuratively speaking. Perhaps he asked your mistress what's going on with her husband, she speculated. I don't know, I responded. What did you hear? She pressed. George called and said you sold the business, she revealed. Why would he call you? I questioned, perplexing her. She corrected herself. He's your best friend. He was curious if I knew. Best friend? What a joke. I was a joke to him, the silly Pole, clueless about what's happening with his own wife behind his back. Apparently, my family felt embarrassed that I was a used car salesman, so yes, I sold the business. Now you won't have to bear that stigma anymore. Shouldn't we have discussed this first? She worried, likely concerned about our livelihood. This is my company. I owned it before we got married, and I can sell it whenever I want. I just hope the new owner treats my former employees well. Did you get a good price for it?" She fretted about her standard of living. "I didn't care. I just knew I needed a change. I'll start job hunting after I take some time off to relax." "What about the mortgage?" She panicked. "I used the money to pay off the house. You only need to worry about utilities and taxes now. What about food? Gas? Insurance?" she almost hysterically asked. "Guess I overlooked those." "Do you think you could work more hours?" I suggested. "When are you coming home?" "This is the moment of truth," she pressed. "I won't return," I said casually. "Remember what you said when I left that evening? Don't worry. I'll figure out how to cover the bills so the power won't be shut off." "You can't do this, Kurt. You need to come back," she pleaded, desperation evident in her voice. "No, I really don't want to," I responded impassively. "Kurt, please don't do this," she cried. "I've already made my decision. What about your daughter?" She tried to appeal to my emotions. "You mean Carrie, the girl who's ashamed of her last name and the fact that her old man is or was a used car salesman?" "Kurt, she's just a 13-year-old girl. You can't take this to heart," I retorted. "Well, it doesn't matter anymore. I won't be back again, so none of you will be embarrassed of me." With those words, I hung up and powered off the phone, letting her contemplate. I knew she'd try calling me back and grow frustrated when I didn't answer. After calming down from the call, I tried to enjoy the leisurely drive to Albuquerque. I assumed her next move would be to contact her lover for more information and to relay what I'd said. Upon reaching my destination, I switched my phone back on and noticed 5 missed messages. I listened to them. 3 from Jenna, 1 from George, and 1 from Anna. I immediately dialed Anna. "Hi, Anna. Sorry, my phone was off. I've been getting unwanted calls," I explained. "Yes, I know. Your wife and George called me to find out where you were. I told them you don't own this place anymore, so you won't be coming back. Hope everything is okay," Anna informed me. "Great," I replied. "They hassle you too much? Tell them you'll call the police for phone molestation." "I like that," she said. "Kurt, you might feel like you don't have family or friends anymore, but trust me, you do. We're your family and always will be." "Thank you, Anna. You know just what to say. I hope your husband realizes how lucky he is," I remarked. "Trust me, he does. He tells me all the time." "Never take that for granted," she assured me. "I won't," I promised. After ending the call, I debated whether to call my unfaithful wife or that idiot. Nah, let them stew. Exiting the Audi, I entered the parking lot office where the owner awaited. "I have that Audi I mentioned. Interested in discussing a swap?" he proposed. "Let's see." He admired the car's condition, inside, out, and under the hood. "I could sell it in a week." "Are you sure about the exchange? Feels like I'm getting the better end. You can return the favor sometime," he suggested. "I'm not here to profit. Just want a sports car," I replied. 30 minutes later, back on the road, top down, relishing the ride. Now where to? North sounded good, so off to Santa Fe. Over the next 2 weeks, I journeyed through northern New Mexico, Arizona, southern Utah, and Colorado. I stayed close in case Anna needed me. I checked in with her a few times, and once things seemed settled, I headed west. Of course, they kept calling. At first, annoyance, then apologies, finally, hints of resentment. I listened, but shrugged it off. When they reported my canceled credit card, I chuckled. George even called, branding me a villain for leaving Jenna and Carrie. I chuckled some more. My lawyer texted me. Jenna threatened legal action if I didn't return. I returned his call. "Hello, Kurt speaking." "So my wife made threats to you?" "Yes, but if you're still paying on the house, don't worry. She'll struggle to prove it," I assured him. "I can offer something better," I continued. "I have a recording where I declare my departure, and she insists I don't come back. It's gold." "Send it my way," he requested. "If she causes any trouble, I'll take it to her lawyer. Let them sort it out." "Thanks. I'll check in next week to see how it's going." I roamed the Southwest. The Miata wasn't the coziest, but it was a blast. Caught glances, even a few flashes from bored middle-aged women. But I wasn't seeking that. After all, I was still hitched no matter what. Drove to Reno, then Lake Tahoe, the coast, Napa Valley, and zigzagged along Highway 1. Yosemite, San Diego, Death Valley to Vegas, then Phoenix. No rush. Chatted with folks in parking lots. Some envied a guy in his 30s who could just hit the road. After approximately 3 months and covering 8,000 miles, I opted to head back to Silver City. Upon arrival at Helpless Auto, I was warmly welcomed by my entire team, including a few new faces. They all expressed joy at my return. Stepping into Anna's office, formerly mine, she looked up. Spotting me, her smile widened even more. Rising from her chair, she walked around her desk and gave me a tight hug. After chatting for a bit, I inquired, "Do you think I can treat everyone to food and drinks at Wrangler's? Can you close the store by 5?" It was already 3. "Absolutely. I'll make sure of it. The whole team will be there." After bidding them farewell and announcing our meeting in 2 hours, I left them in high spirits. Next, I paid a visit to my lawyer. During my travels, he informed me that Jenna had attempted to claim abandonment to seize my assets, but he managed to thwart her efforts. We discussed our next steps. At 5, I joined the team at Wrangler's restaurant. We enjoyed a fantastic dinner, and it was delightful catching up with everyone. As the evening wound down, they began to depart, leaving only Anna and me. She gazed at me and said, "You know, Kurt, you might feel powerless and lost, but you're mistaken. You simply placed trust in those you loved." I met her gaze. "So, you figured it out?" "Yes. It took some time, but your mention of the new name telling the whole story lingered in my mind until I grasped it. You may be Polish, but those jokes never truly define you. They insult your heritage and who you are." "Thank you, Anna. You're the primary reason I returned. I had to witness how you handled my responsibilities. I'm pleased to say you haven't filled my shoes. You forged your own path." I had an exceptional mentor. She expressed gratitude, we embraced, and then she departed to her husband, who appeared genuinely content. I headed back to the apartment I hadn't visited in 3 months. The air was stale, necessitating some ventilation. Opening the windows, I allowed the refreshing evening breeze to permeate the rooms. I grabbed a beer and settled on the terrace overlooking the pool. Several people were swimming, and a family was enjoying themselves nearby. My mind drifted to Jenna and me. We once harbored lofty aspirations and dreams when we tied the knot. Now, they seemed to have vanished. Glancing at the wall clock, I noted it was around 8:30. A realization struck me. It was time for a confrontation. I rose, hopped into my Miata, and drove to my house. Technically still mine since I purchased it before marrying Jenna, and my name was the only one on the deed. Disappointment washed over me as I pulled into the driveway. The yard was unkempt. It appeared the landscaping had been neglected. The porch light was on, indicating Jenna was likely home. I approached the door and knocked. After a moment, Carrie answered. Her eyes widened as she greeted me. "Dad? Hi, Carrie. Is your mom home?" She stuttered before yelling, "Mother!" From the kitchen, I heard Jenna's tense, high-pitched voice. "What's the matter?" Carrie continued to stare at me and loudly exclaimed, "Dad!" Jenna appeared from around the corner, spotting me, and shrieked. "Where are you going?" I opted to respond calmly to her outcry. "Traveling," I stated evenly. Just then, George emerged from the bedroom in his underwear. "Oh," I remarked. "The whole family is here. Mom, Dad, and child." "What the hell are you talking about?" Jenna retorted sharply. "I guess George has stepped in to fill my role after all. It's rightfully his," I remarked. Jenna appeared puzzled, while Carrie's tone turned visibly enraged. "Actually, young lady, you seem to be misinformed," I interjected, knowing she disliked being corrected. "George never worked for me by his own choice, so I couldn't have fired him. Regarding bills, all utilities and car insurance are covered." Jenna interrupted. "What about groceries and gas for the car? You had a job. Did you lose it? It used to cover expenses while I was away." "Do you think you can just waltz back in and take over?" Jenna challenged. "No. I'll wait until you and your partner find somewhere else to live. It was clear they were staying together in my house, and Carrie seemed fine with it." Jenna retorted. "I'm not leaving my home." "Correction. This is my home. It was mine before we married, and only my name is on the deed," I asserted. "You left, so now he's mine," Jenna insisted. "That's not how the law works. Since I cover the utilities and taxes, I remain the legal owner. Even though I've been away briefly, it's still mine. Don't worry, I'll give you until the end of next month to find a new place. Just make sure you take your daughter with you." "What do you mean, your daughter? She's our daughter," Jenna protested. "You couldn't have said it more accurately," I chuckled. Jenna looked confused. Turning to Carrie, I disclosed, "Carrie, I know you dislike being called Polish, so here's some news. Your real father isn't me. It's George." Silence enveloped the room. After a moment, Jenna whispered, "What?" "Yes, Jenna. It seems your carelessness on our wedding day resulted in a child, but not mine. However, it's good news for you, Carrie. You can now take your real father's last name and become Carrie." I wonder if perhaps Mom chose the name Carrie out of respect for her lover, I pondered aloud. Jenna and George exchanged looks, the color draining from his face. What about you, George? Don't you want to step up as a father? Well, that's unfortunate. It's time to take responsibility. But look at the bright side. It's just 4 more years until college, I remarked. Jenna and George nearly echoed each other. I don't believe in that. With a swift motion, I handed them the DNA report. See for yourselves. They snatched it, glanced at it, and then both collapsed. Carrie, inform the lovebirds that your mom will be served with divorce papers next week, along with an eviction notice, I instructed before walking away. Throughout my absence, I couldn't shake the thought of whether this affair had been ongoing during our marriage. Did she choose me, or was I just a pawn? I felt utterly helpless, ignorant, and vulnerable. George had mocked me behind my back and even cracked Polish jokes to my face. Back at the apartment, I drowned my thoughts in beer. The next morning, I visited the lawyer to initiate the paperwork. Despite knowing I'd have to sell the house and split the proceeds, being a barely working person meant I wouldn't owe alimony or child support, especially with another man in my place. At least that's what I hoped for. The betrayal by Jenna and George was devastating. Rebuilding trust, whether with a man or woman, would be a daunting task. Perhaps I should consider therapy. As the divorce proceedings commenced, I returned to work at the dealership, emphasizing to my colleagues that I was no longer the boss and only needed 1 sale per week to cover my expenses. I even insisted on just 1. When faced with court-ordered child support, I ensured that my bank accounts were emptied, leaving only enough for my basic needs at month's end. Jenna hired a lawyer, though I questioned how she could afford one. Perhaps he worked pro bono. Regardless, they'd be in for a surprise. Despite scrutinizing my accounts and the sale itself, they failed to uncover anything substantial. I learned from my colleagues that during my absence, George visited the dealership almost daily for the first 2 weeks, trying to secure work from Anna. However, she consistently turned him down. Eventually, he gave up. Now he regretted not obtaining his ASE certification, as his only job prospect was at Valvoline, doing quick oil changes for $13 an hour. I hoped Jenna would work full-time, or they'd struggle financially. I contacted the realtor and notified Jenna that I was listing the house for sale, anticipating a 50-50 split of our assets. Since she had already received an eviction notice, she needed to vacate before the sale closed. One evening, Jenna knocked on my door and I reluctantly let her in. "What do you want, Kurt? Can we talk?" she asked. "I'm not sure it's a good idea. We're in a legal battle," I replied. "Come on, Kurt. It's just us. No lawyers. Can't we have a civil conversation?" she pleaded. "All right, but let's go to Denny's," I suggested. "There'll be witnesses," I thought to myself. I didn't trust her enough to be alone with her. At Denny's, after exchanging pleasantries, I asked, "Why, Jenna?" She hesitated before answering. "I guess the simple answer is that I liked both of you and couldn't choose." "So you were seeing both of us at the same time?" I questioned. Jenna looked down and admitted, "Yes, but George warned me not to tell you because he knew it would ruin your relationship with him." "Then why did you say yes when I proposed?" I inquired. "Because I loved you." "And George?" she replied. "I loved him too, but I knew he wouldn't make a good husband. So we ended things when you proposed and I focused on us and our wedding plans." "So on our wedding day you were with him?" I probed. Jenna started crying and confessed, "Yes, everything was a mess." "Then what was it?" I pressed further. "I didn't want to lose him and he didn't want to lose me," she admitted. "Well, now you have each other and your child. By the way, she did a great job with the name. I didn't even realize until later. During my travels, I didn't know Carrie wasn't yours," I revealed. Jenna looked at me and said, "Kurt, I still love you." "It's nice to hear, Jenna, but I'm not sure you understand what love truly means," I replied. "I loved you more than anything, and clearly you can't say the same," she retorted. "I loved you, but now I feel nothing but contempt," I stated firmly. Jenna realized our relationship was over. There would never be an us again. Before she left, I had to ask one final question. "Have you ever stopped?" After hesitating, she decided to tell the truth. "We never ceased. We had our quiet times, but we typically met twice a month," she admitted. I was hoping for a different response, but I appreciate your honesty. One more thing. About a year ago, your behavior towards me changed. What triggered it?" I inquired. Her face flushed red, then she grew slightly angry. "George started pushing for a bacchanalia not involving you." "I might have considered it if you were involved, but we couldn't navigate it. His persistence made me resent you for something I knew you wouldn't agree to. It's odd, but I thought I could have both of my men together and resented you for not being open to it," she confessed. Did you go through with it? I asked. No, I contemplated it. But then you left, and everything fell apart, she admitted. Well, now you're free to pursue it. Your choices don't affect me anymore, I remarked. Sensing our conversation was concluding, I settled the bill, and we headed to our cars. 4 months later, we stood before a judge and finalized our divorce. George was present too. Exiting the courthouse, Jenna suggested, maybe we can grab a drink, the traditional way. Certainly, I agreed. Despite the previous animosity, it had dissipated. Then I thought, this marks the end of my association with them. They can now be together. Let them wallow in their own mess. They deserve each other. Jenna will have to adjust to a lower standard of living. All right, maybe the resentment hasn't completely faded. Despite being Polish, I demand respect.
Story 4. Mark Lawson's fingers flew across the keyboard, lines of code materializing on his monitor. The office around him buzzed with a low hum of computers and muted conversations. He glanced at the clock. 7:30 p.m. Another late night. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The pregnancy tracker app on his phone showed 28 weeks. A small smile crossed his face as he thought of Hannah, his wife, at home. Lately, she'd been distant, but he chalked it up to the stress of the pregnancy. "Time to head out," he muttered, shutting down his computer. The cool San Francisco evening greeted him as he left the office building. Traffic crawled along the streets, horns blaring in the distance. Mark's stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since lunch. An idea struck him. "I'll surprise her with dinner," he said to himself, changing direction towards Hannah's favorite Thai restaurant. 20 minutes later, Mark juggled a bag of takeout and a bouquet of flowers as he fumbled for his keys. The house was eerily quiet as he stepped inside. "Hannah," he called out, setting the food and flowers on the kitchen counter. No response. A faint unease crept over him as he climbed the stairs to their bedroom. "Hon, you up here?" The bedroom door creaked open. Mark's eyes swept the room, landing on something that didn't belong. His breath caught in his throat. There, on the plush carpet beside their bed, lay 2 used condoms. Mark's world tilted on its axis. He stumbled back, gripping the doorframe for support. His mind raced, searching for an explanation that didn't exist. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "No, no, no." Time seemed to stretch as Mark stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the damning evidence. The sound of the front door opening snapped him back to reality. "Mark, you home?" Hannah's voice drifted up the stairs. Rage and hurt warred within him as he descended the stairs. Hannah stood in the entryway, her pregnant belly prominent under her flowing top. She smiled at him, but it faltered as she took in his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowing. Mark's voice was low and dangerous when he spoke. "Why are there used condoms in our bedroom, Hannah?" The color drained from Hannah's face. For a moment, she looked trapped, but then her features hardened into a mask of cold indifference. "I thought you were cheating on me," she said, her tone accusatory. Mark recoiled as if he'd been slapped. "Cheating? What the hell are you talking about? I've been working late for the baby." Hannah's laugh was bitter. "Right, working late. Is that what they call it now?" "This isn't about me," Mark growled, taking a step towards her. "Answer the question. Who have you been sleeping with in our bed?" Hannah crossed her arms, her chin lifting defiantly. "I had a revenge affair." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. He stumbled back, gripping the stair railing for support. "Revenge affair? What? What does that even mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like," Hannah replied, her voice devoid of emotion. "I thought you were seeing someone else, so I slept with someone." Mark's head spun. He felt like he was drowning, gasping for air in a sea of betrayal. But Hannah wasn't finished. Her next words would shatter what remained of his world. "And now, this baby," she said, placing a hand on her swollen belly. "It isn't yours." The room went silent. Mark stared at Hannah, uncomprehending. "What did you just say?" "You heard me," Hannah said, her voice steady. "The baby isn't yours." He took off the condom without telling me. Mark's legs gave out, and he sank onto the stairs. "Are you seriously telling me the baby is from this affair?" Hannah nodded, her expression unchanged. "Yes, and I'm leaving. You can figure out your life from here. Good luck raising someone else's child." Mark watched in stunned silence as Hannah grabbed a bag he hadn't noticed by the door. Without another word or a backwards glance, she walked out, closing the door behind her with a quiet click that echoed in the suddenly empty house. For a long moment, Mark sat motionless on the stairs, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The scent of the Thai food wafted from the kitchen, a cruel reminder of his shattered plans for a romantic evening. With mechanical movements, he stood and walked to the kitchen. The flowers he'd bought lay on the counter, already beginning to wilt. In a burst of anger, he swept them to the floor, petals scattering across the tile. He grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the cabinet and collapsed onto the couch in the living room. As he took a long swallow, burning his throat, the reality of the situation began to sink in. His wife had cheated on him, The baby he'd been so excited about, the future he'd been working so hard for, was all a lie. And now, Hannah was gone, leaving him alone with the wreckage of their life together. The night stretched on endlessly as Mark sat on the couch, alternating between numbness and bursts of raw, agonizing pain. Every happy memory with Hannah now felt tainted, poisoned by her betrayal. As dawn broke, casting weak light through the windows, Mark hadn't slept a wink. His eyes were red-rimmed, his stubble dark against his pale skin. The bottle of whiskey stood empty on the coffee table. With shaking hands, he reached for his phone. He needed help, needed someone to tell him this was all a bad dream. He dialed a familiar number. "Kyle," he said when his friend answered, his voice hoarse. "I need you. Hannah, she's gone. She cheated. The baby's not mine. I don't know what to do." Kyle's voice came through, sharp with concern. "I'll be right there, Mark. Don't do anything. Just wait for me." Mark let the phone fall from his hand. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, Hannah's cold words replaying in his mind like a torturous loop. An hour later, a knock at the door roused Mark from his stupor. He opened it to find Kyle, his friend's face etched with worry. Kyle took in Mark's disheveled appearance and the state of the house. "Jesus, Mark. What happened?" Mark led Kyle to the living room, collapsing back onto the couch. In halting words, he recounted the events of the previous night, Hannah's confession, her cold departure, the devastating news about the baby. Kyle listened, his expression growing darker with each word. When Mark finished, Kyle stood, pacing the room. "That bitch," he growled. "I'm sorry, Mark, but what she did, it's unforgivable." Mark nodded, a lump in his throat. "I don't even recognize her anymore, Kyle. She just left like it was nothing." Kyle stopped pacing, turning to face Mark. His eyes were hard, determined. "Listen to me, Mark. She's cold. And now it's time for you to get just as ruthless. We're not going to let her drag you down with her mess." "What do you mean?" Mark asked, a spark of something, maybe hope, maybe vengeance igniting in his chest. Kyle sat beside him, leaning forward intensely. "First thing we need to do is get a paternity test. There's no way you're paying child support for someone else's kid. I'm sure her lawyer is already working on coming after you." Mark hadn't even considered the legal implications. The thought of being forced to support a child born from Hannah's betrayal made his blood boil. "You really think she'd do that?" he asked. Kyle's laugh was bitter. "After what she's already done? Absolutely. We need to file for divorce immediately and request that paternity test. We're going to protect you, Mark." For the first time since Hannah's betrayal, Mark felt a glimmer of control returning. He nodded, straightening his shoulders. "Okay, what do we do first?" Kyle pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my office now. We're going to get the paperwork started today. You're not in this alone, Mark. We're going to fight, and we're going to win." As Kyle made the call, Mark stood and walked to the window. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had changed, but for him, everything was different. The man who had left this house yesterday trusting, loving, excited for the future was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone harder, colder, and determined not to be a victim. Hannah had made her choice, had destroyed their life together without a second thought. Now, it was his turn to make a choice. He would fight, he would survive, and he would never, ever forgive. The harsh morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating the mess in Mark's living room. Empty takeout containers littered the coffee table, a silent reminder of the life he thought he had just days ago. Mark sat on the couch, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, as Kyle paced the room, phone to his ear. "Yes, that's right. We need to file for divorce immediately," Kyle said, his voice clipped and professional. He paused, listening. "And we'll be requesting a paternity test as well." "Yes, as soon as possible." Mark watched his friend, a mix of gratitude and despair swirling in his chest. How had his life come to this? Kyle ended the call and turned to Mark. "All right, the wheels are in motion. My firm will handle everything. Now, we need to talk strategy." Mark nodded, sitting up straighter. "What do I need to do?" Kyle sat across from him, leaning forward intently. "First things first, we need to gather all your financial documents. Bank statements, investment accounts, everything. We need a clear picture of your assets." "You think Hannah will come after my money?" Mark asked, a bitter taste in his mouth. Kyle's expression hardened. After what she's done, we have to assume she'll try to take you for everything she can. But we're not going to let that happen. Mark stood, pacing the room. I just don't understand, Kyle. How could she do this? We were happy, weren't we? Kyle's voice was gentle but firm. Mark, listen to me. Whatever you thought you had with Hannah, it wasn't real. She betrayed you in the worst way possible. You can't waste time trying to understand her actions. We need to focus on protecting you. Mark nodded, squaring his shoulders. You're right. Where do we start? The next few days passed in a blur of paperwork and legal jargon. Mark threw himself into the process, grateful for the distraction from the constant ache in his chest. He and Kyle worked late into the night, combing through financial records and preparing their case. A week after Hannah's departure, Mark's phone buzzed with a text. His heart leaped into his throat when he saw it was from her. Hannah, we need to talk. Can we meet? Mark stared at the message, his hands shaking. Kyle looked up from the papers spread across the dining table. What is it? He asked, noting Mark's expression. Mark handed him the phone. Kyle read the message, his face darkening. Don't respond, Kyle said firmly. Anything you say can be used against you in court. Let me handle all communication from now on. Mark nodded, but couldn't shake the unsettling feeling Hannah's message left him with. What more could she possibly have to say? 2 days later, Mark received an official-looking envelope in the mail. His stomach dropped as he read the return address. Helen Morton, attorney at law. With trembling hands, he opened the envelope and scanned the contents. His vision blurred as he read the words child support and spousal maintenance. He immediately called Kyle. They're coming after me, Mark said as soon as Kyle picked up. Hannah's lawyer. They want child support and alimony. Kyle's voice was calm, steadying. Deep breaths, Mark. This is expected. Remember, we have a paternity test scheduled. Once we have those results, we can fight this. Mark collapsed onto the couch, running a hand through his unkempt hair. How can she do this, Kyle? How can she expect me to support a child that isn't even mine? Because she's desperate and ruthless, Kyle replied, his tone hard. But we're going to be smarter and tougher. Trust me, Mark, we're going to win this. The next few weeks felt like a waking nightmare for Mark. He threw himself into his work, staying late at the office to avoid going home to an empty house filled with memories of Hannah. When he wasn't working, he was meeting with Kyle, preparing for the legal battle ahead. Finally, the day of the paternity test arrived. Mark sat in the sterile waiting room of the clinic, his leg bouncing nervously. Kyle sat beside him, a reassuring presence. Mr. Lawson, a nurse called. We're ready for you. The test itself was quick and painless, a simple cheek swab. As Mark left the clinic, Kyle clapped him on the shoulder. Now we wait, Kyle said. But don't worry. This is going to be the key to our case. A week later, Mark's phone rang. It was Kyle. The results are in, Kyle said without preamble. You're not the father, Mark. Mark let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Despite everything, a small part of him had still hoped. But no, Hannah's betrayal was complete. What now? Mark asked, his voice hollow. Now we go on the offensive, Kyle replied, a note of triumph in his voice. I'm filing a motion to dismiss any claims for child support. With this evidence, there's no way they can force you to pay for a child that isn't yours. For the first time in weeks, Mark felt a glimmer of hope. And Hannah? She doesn't have a leg to stand on, Kyle assured him. Her decision to leave, her affair, it all works in our favor. You're going to come out of this clean, Mark? I promise. The next day, Mark received another text from Hannah. Hannah, please, Mark. We need to talk. It's important. Mark stared at the message, a mix of anger and pain swirling in his chest. After everything she'd done, she still thought she had the right to demand anything from him? He typed out a response, his fingers flying across the screen. Mark, there's nothing to talk about. The paternity test confirmed what you told me. The baby isn't mine. Whatever game you're playing, I want no part of it. Don't contact me again. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then immediately called Kyle. I texted Hannah back, he said when Kyle answered. I told her not to contact me again. Kyle was silent for a moment. Okay, not ideal, but we can work with this. Forward me the entire exchange. And Mark, no more direct communication with her. Everything goes through me from now on, understood? Understood. Mark agreed, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. He was done with Hannah's manipulation. The legal proceedings dragged on for months. Mark threw himself into his work, climbing the corporate ladder with a single-minded focus that both impressed and worried his colleagues. He ignored their concerned looks and whispered conversations. None of them could understand what he was going through. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the court made its decision. Mark sat in the courtroom, Kyle by his side, as the judge delivered the verdict. In light of the DNA evidence provided and the circumstances of Mrs. Lawson's departure from the marital home, the court finds that Mr. Lawson bears no legal or financial responsibility for the child in question. All claims for child support are hereby dismissed. Mark let out a shaky breath. Kyle squeezed his shoulder, a rare smile on his face. "We did it," Kyle whispered. "It's over." But as Mark looked across the courtroom and met Hannah's eyes, he knew it wasn't over. Not really. The betrayal, the pain, the shattered trust, those wounds would take far longer to heal, if they ever did. As they left the courthouse, Kyle turned to Mark. "What now? Want to grab a drink to celebrate?" Mark shook his head. "Thanks, but no. I think I need some time alone." Kyle nodded, understanding. "All right. But Mark, it's okay to move forward now. You're free." Free. The word echoed in Mark's mind as he drove home. Was he really free? Or would Hannah's betrayal always be a shadow hanging over him? As he walked into his empty house, Mark's phone buzzed with a notification. Another text from Hannah. "Hannah, I know you said not to contact you, but please. I made a mistake. The father of the baby is gone. I'm alone. We can work this out, can't we? For old time's sake?" Mark stared at the message, a cold fury building in his chest. After everything she'd put him through, she had the audacity to ask for his help. His fingers flew across the keyboard as he typed his response. "Mark, you made your choice when you betrayed me. You got your revenge. Now live with it. Don't contact me again. We're done." He hit send, then blocked her number. For a moment, he stood in the silence of his house, the weight of the past months heavy on his shoulders. Then, slowly, he walked to the bedroom. He opened the closet, pulling out the last box of Hannah's things he'd been too hurt to deal with before. Without hesitation, he carried it to the curb and left it for the garbage collectors. Back inside, Mark looked around the house. It was time for a change, time to reclaim his life, his space, his future. Hannah had taken so much from him, but he wouldn't let her take anything more. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Hey, Mike?" "Yeah, it's Mark. Listen, remember that position you mentioned in the New York office? Is it still open?" "Great. I want it." "Yes, I'm sure. It's time for a fresh start." As he hung up, Mark felt something he hadn't in months, a sense of possibility. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time since Hannah's betrayal, he felt ready to face it. He was Mark Lawson, survivor, fighter, and now finally free. The New York skyline stretched out before Mark as he gazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his new office. 6 months had passed since he'd left San Francisco, and with it, the wreckage of his marriage to Hannah. The pain hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had dulled to a manageable ache. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, turning from the window. Mike, his new boss, entered with a grin. "Mark, my man, how's the view treating you?" Mark managed a small smile. "Can't complain. It's a long way from coding in a cubicle." Mike clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, you've earned it. Your work on the Jensen project was outstanding. The clients are thrilled." "Thanks, Mike. I appreciate the opportunity." Mike's expression softened. "Listen, a bunch of us are grabbing drinks after work. Why don't you join us? You've been here 6 months, and I don't think I've seen you socialize once." Mark hesitated. The thought of small talk and forced laughter made him cringe. "I don't know, Mike. I've got a lot of work to finish up here." "Come on, Mark. All work and no play. You know the rest. One drink, that's all I'm asking." After a moment, Mark nodded. "All right, one drink." Mike beamed. "Great. We'll head out around 7. Don't work too hard until then." As the door closed behind Mike, Mark sank into his chair. He knew his colleagues meant well, but the thought of socializing still felt exhausting. Ever since Hannah's betrayal, He'd thrown himself into work, using it as a shield against the pain and loneliness. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and code reviews. At 7, Mark found himself in a trendy bar, nursing a whiskey as his co-workers chatted around him. So, Mark, Sarah, one of the project managers, leaned towards him. "What brought you to New York? You never talk about San Francisco." Mark tensed, taking a large swallow of his drink. "Just needed a change of scenery," he said shortly. Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Must have been some scenery. You left a senior position to start over here. There's got to be a story there." Before Mark could respond, Mike intervened. "Hey, let's not interrogate the man. Mark's work speaks for itself. We're lucky to have him." Mark shot Mike a grateful look as the conversation shifted to safer topics. An hour later, he made his excuses and left, the cool night air a relief after the crowded bar. As he walked home, his phone buzzed. A text from Kyle. "Kyle, hey man, how's the Big Apple treating you? Haven't heard from you in a while." Mark paused, guilt washing over him. Kyle had been there for him through the worst of it, and he'd barely kept in touch since the move. "Mark, sorry, been busy with work. New York's good. Different. How are things there?" Kyle's response came quickly. "Kyle, same old, same old. Hey, heads up. Ran into Hannah yesterday." Mark's stomach clenched. He'd managed to go weeks without thinking about her, and now, with 2 simple sentences, Kyle had brought it all rushing back. "Mark, how did she look?" "Kyle, rough. She was pushing a stroller. Looked like she hasn't slept in months." Mark stared at the message, a whirlwind of emotions churning inside him. Part of him felt a vindictive satisfaction at Hannah's apparent struggles. Another part, one he tried to ignore, felt a twinge of concern. "Mark, did she say anything?" "Kyle asked about you. I told her you'd moved on. She seemed, I don't know, regretful, maybe." Mark's jaw clenched. "Regretful? After what she'd done?" "Mark, thanks for the heads up. I've got to go. Talk soon." He shoved the phone in his pocket and quickened his pace, as if he could outrun the memories Kyle's message had stirred up. The next morning, Mark woke to an email notification. His heart skipped a beat when he saw the sender, Hannah Lawson. For a long moment, he stared at his phone, his finger hovering over the delete button. Finally, curiosity won out. He opened the email. "Mark, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from. I don't blame you. What I did was unforgivable. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I needed you to know that I'm sorry. Sorrier than I've ever been about anything in my life. The baby, she's beautiful. Her name is Lily. Sometimes when I look at her, all I can think about is how much you would have loved her if things had been different, if I hadn't been so stupid and selfish. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I regret what I did every single day. I hope you're doing well, wherever you are." Mark read the email twice, then a third time. His hands shook as he set the phone down. He'd imagined this moment so many times, Hannah realizing what she'd thrown away, regretting her choices. He thought it would feel like victory. Instead, he felt empty. He picked up the phone again, his thumb hovering over the reply button. What could he possibly say? That he was glad she was struggling? That he hoped she felt even a fraction of the pain she'd caused him? In the end, he closed the email without responding. He had a life to live, one that didn't include Hannah or her regrets. Weeks passed. Mark threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, determined to push thoughts of Hannah and her email out of his mind. He took on extra projects, worked late into the night, anything to keep busy. One evening, as he was leaving the office, he quite literally ran into someone in the lobby. "Oh, I'm so sorry," a female voice exclaimed. Mark looked up, an apology on his lips, and froze. The woman standing before him was stunning, long, dark hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that made his heart skip a beat. "No, it was my fault," he managed. "I wasn't looking where I was going." She laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Well, let's call it a draw then. I'm Olivia, by the way. I'm starting in marketing next week." "Mark," he replied, shaking her offered hand. "I'm in software development." "Nice to meet you, Mark from software development. Maybe I'll see you around." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of her perfume and a strange flutter in Mark's chest. Over the next few weeks, Mark found himself running into Olivia more and more. Each time, their conversations grew longer, more personal. For the first time since Hannah's betrayal, Mark felt a spark of interest in someone else. One Friday evening, as they both worked late, Olivia appeared in his office doorway. "You know, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," she teased. Mark looked up, a smile tugging at his lips. "Are you calling me dull?" Olivia laughed. "Not yet, but you're getting dangerously close. Come on, it's Friday night. Let's grab a drink." Mark hesitated. The walls he'd built around himself since Hannah's betrayal felt sturdy, safe. But looking at Olivia's warm smile, he felt a crack forming in those defenses. "All right," he said, surprising himself. One drink. One drink turned into two, then dinner. Before Mark knew it, hours had passed, filled with laughter and conversation that flowed effortlessly. As they walked out of the restaurant, Olivia turned to him. "I had a really great time tonight, Mark." "Me too," he replied, realizing he meant it. "Would you like to do this again sometime? Maybe something a little more official than running into each other at work?" Mark felt a moment of panic. The idea of opening himself up to someone new, of being vulnerable again, terrified him. But looking at Olivia, he felt something he hadn't in a long time hope. "I'd like that," he said softly. Olivia's smile was radiant. "Great. It's a date then." As Mark walked home that night, he felt lighter than he had in months. The weight of Hannah's betrayal, which had been a constant presence for so long, seemed to lift just a little. The next morning, Mark woke to a text from Kyle. "Kyle, hey man, how's it going? Been a while since we caught up." Mark smiled, realizing he actually had something positive to share. "Mark, things are good. Really good, actually. I met someone." Kyle's response was immediate. "Kyle, that's great, Mark. I'm happy for you. You deserve it after everything." "Mark, thanks. It's early days, but I don't know. It feels right." "Kyle, just be careful, okay? I don't want to see you get hurt again." Mark appreciated Kyle's concern, but for once, it didn't feel necessary. "Mark, I will. But I think it's time to start moving forward." As he set his phone down, Mark felt a sense of peace wash over him. He'd spent so long letting Hannah's betrayal define him, letting it close him off from the possibility of happiness. Maybe it was time to let that go. Weeks turned into months. Mark's relationship with Olivia deepened, growing into something real and meaningful. For the first time since Hannah, he allowed himself to imagine a future with someone else. It was on a crisp autumn day, almost a year after he'd moved to New York, that Mark's past and present collided. He and Olivia were walking through Central Park, enjoying the fall colors, when Mark stopped dead in his tracks. There, sitting on a bench not 20 feet away, was Hannah. She looked different, thinner, tired, with dark circles under her eyes. A baby stroller was parked next to the bench, and Mark could just make out a tiny hand reaching up from inside. Olivia touched his arm, concern in her eyes. "Mark, what's wrong?" Before he could respond, Hannah looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Hannah stood slowly, her eyes never leaving Mark's face. She took a hesitant step forward, then another. "Mark," she said softly, her voice carrying on the autumn breeze. "Is that really you?" Mark felt Olivia tense beside him. He squeezed her hand reassuringly before stepping forward to meet Hannah. "Hello, Hannah," he said, his voice steady. Hannah's eyes flickered to Olivia, then back to Mark. "You look good. Happy." "I am," Mark replied, surprised to find he meant it. Hannah nodded, a sad smile on her face. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy, Mark. After everything." She trailed off, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mark, for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know how much I regret what I did." Mark was silent for a long moment, studying the woman who had once been his whole world. The anger he'd carried for so long had faded, leaving behind a dull ache and a sense of pity. "Thank you for saying that," he said finally. "I hope you're doing okay, Hannah." Hannah wiped at her eyes. "I'm surviving. It's been hard, but Lily, she makes it worth it." As if on cue, a cry came from the stroller. Hannah turned, lifting a small, dark-haired baby into her arms. "This is Lily," she said softly, looking at Mark with a mix of sadness and hope. Mark looked at the baby, feeling a strange twist in his chest. In another life, this could have been his child. But that life was gone, lost in a haze of betrayal and broken trust. "She's beautiful," he said honestly. "I hope you both have a good life, Hannah." Hannah's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Thank you, Mark. I'm trying to be better. For her." Mark nodded. "Good. That's good." An awkward silence fell between them. Finally, Mark cleared his throat. "We should go," he said, gesturing to Olivia. It was good to see you, Hannah. Take care of yourself." Hannah nodded, clutching Lily closer. "You too, Mark. Be happy. You deserve it." As Mark turned away, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. He walked back to Olivia, who was watching him with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Mark looked at her. He saw the warmth in her eyes, the care and concern on her face. He thought about the past year, about the joy and laughter she'd brought into his life. "You know what?" he said, a smile spreading across his face. "I really am." He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. As they walked away, Mark glanced back one last time. Hannah was still standing there, Lily in her arms, watching them go. For a moment, Mark felt a pang of what might have been. But as he turned back to Olivia, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The betrayal that had once defined him no longer held that power. He had survived, he had grown, and now, finally, he was ready to truly live again. As they walked through the park, the autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet, Mark felt a sense of peace wash over him. The future stretched out before him, full of possibility and hope. He was a Mark Lawson survivor, fighter, and now, at last, truly free.